When they got back to the house, he rushed to his work area, overflowing with confidence that even if it wasn't as optimal as it could be, he'd be able to solve the issue of the vampire's enthrallment, and with that in mind was eager to get to work. He did the same thing he'd been doing before, wrapping the model teeth with a wire that could sit on them comfortably, while still being able to remove them, but continued on past that, securing those wires to what would admittedly be a large hunk of metal, which he shaped to be filled with holes, allowing for easier breathing and blood consumption. It wouldn't be the most pleasant thing to use, but since it would only be needed when they ate, it wouldn't be too big of a deal. Once it was done, all it came down to was properly applying the structure of the enchantment he'd decided on, and for that he would need Mercy. He ran into the main house, searching around before he found her as she was going to rest, and was shocked by his abrupt entrance. "Hey, I may have figured it out. Come here so I can test it," he called, and without waiting for a response or agreement went up to her with the item in hand, fully prepared to shove it in her mouth. She saw the excitement in his eyes, and remembering how unreserved he was in examining her teeth when she first addressed her problem, decided to make things easier on herself by opening wide and letting him place it. "Now I can't promise this will be comfortable, but just bear with it for a little while as I set up the enchantment. It shouldn't take too long." With one hand on the vampiric leader's face as he connected to her and the other in her mouth to touch the item and create the enchantment, he got to work, doing his best to finish it up quickly while ignoring the feeling of her teeth stabbing into his hand, his warm flesh causing them to extend and create gashes for blood to flow. It only took a few minutes, though for the both of them it felt much longer, before Ben was done. Now that just leaves testing, doesn't it? He couldn't use a passimeter for it, the same sort of device used to determine the amount of charm Thera gave off. Instead, they'd have to test it out the old-fashioned way, meaning asking the Queen to set something up. It was as he put the request in to Pelania, only to be told it would have to wait until the morning, that he went to the room he'd been provided so he could get some rest, but instead seeing two unexpected guests. "Leave it to a low-worlder to make us wait," Glob said with a voice filled with annoyance. "I didn't have anything scheduled with you. This Quillith, I owe an apology. My bad. I forgot what time of the month it was." "It's no issue. It gave me some time to talk with this one," he responded calmly, though giving a deeply exhausted impression. "Anyway, shall we begin your lessons?" "Sure, sounds good to me." For months now they'd been meeting, with the little gray providing him with information on materials and material science in general that he might not have otherwise been able to get. They didn't bother with the more common materials, though, the kind that he was already deeply familiar with and used on a regular basis, but on those that were rare in the world, some only just getting their refinement methods discovered thanks to the intervention and aid of the Greys. It seemed like the little aliens were hard at work trying to get a sense for the structure of matter in the world and slowly building up a periodic table in the process. Of course, from what he'd gotten the chance to see, it was nothing like the one from his world. He may not have paid the most attention in the few mandatory chemistry classes in the first years of high school, but it was clear that certain materials were out of order compared to where their Earth equivalents would be, with some missing altogether while other, stranger ones took their place. It was dull stuff, but despite that he did his best to pay attention and take notes. These lessons were already affecting how he worked with a few materials after all, and he was seeing great success from it. The one thing he couldn't figure out was what Glob was doing there. The racist little alien didn't seem to need any of the information he was learning, not to mention the fact that he was falling asleep as the hours wore on. But by the end of the night he got his answer as Quillith stared into the other gray, eyes filled with a level of expectation that Glob seemed to want to avoid. "Well?" the more mature of the two asked. "Seriously? Do I need to ask him?" "Yes, obviously you need to." "Ugh, fine. Hey low-worlder. Make me a weapon." "Nope." Ben was able to easily tell him, not needing to give a second of thought. "What, why not?" "Because that's not how you ask a favor from someone." Quillith could only groan as his fellow Grey didn't even pretend to have any manners. And seeing that trying to force some responsibility on the other alien wouldn't work, began talking in his place. Ignoring his terrible attitude, "I'd like to request you make a weapon for him, as well as armor for the other 19 of my people on this world, please." With Quillith asking, it became harder to decline out of hand. Even if he didn't want to get wrapped up in whatever nonsense the Greys were dealing with that they wanted help for, he found himself liking the guy well enough, and realistically it was a small request. That didn't mean he would just accept it though. Why me? The entire world knows about your people now. There's no reason you couldn't get someone better to make it for him when you've officially aligned yourselves as allies of the world. Right? He received a funny look before getting a reply. You really aren't very aware of skill distribution in the overall state of the world, are you? I think it's pretty clear I'm not. Alright, well, to put it simply, you're good. Usually, to be able to consistently make items that break into the rare quality. It's either a team of individuals with more specialized skills than your crafting working together to make an item, or else if it's just an individual, then it comes down to someone who's just about to awaken their skill or who already has. From what we can see, there's typically only 2 or 3 people at any time with an awakened version of any given crafting type skill. Probably less for the crafting skill you have, since it's typically supposed to be far harder to level due to being less specialized. Despite that, you're doing quite well for yourself, and with the combination of your connect skill you're able to make things that none of the others we might find would. Alright, I love being buttered up, and also I'll consider it. In that case, what do you want me to make? As I've said, armor for most of them, it's just Global Gork we have something a little simpler in mind for. You are aware of the issues we're having in creating a general weapon that could be mass-produced for the population, are you not? I am. It had taken so long that he'd ended up solving the problem for himself, albeit in a way that couldn't be mass-produced like he'd initially hoped. The materials that went into it weren't the sort of things that an average person could get their hands on. Surprisingly though, it was exactly that sort of weapon that the Grey had in mind. We're specifically looking to have one of your guns made. We'll also tell you the general measurements for armor as well, but that's the goal. Well, I guess I've got nothing against doing it if you guys manage to provide the materials and pay for the work. Speaking of, how do you plan on paying? I'm already getting most of everything I need from you guys. No offense. Negotiations are currently underway with Pelania to provide you with those materials. While I can't get much, we should be able to convince her to provide a small amount of a magic material as payment, though it would be nothing like the scale you received as your dowry, maybe a little less than a handful. Aside from that though, we're prepared to make an offer for the future. Should you be able to awaken your enchanting and connect skills, I'll ensure that all of the Greys on this world go to you to get their skills copied. That would be huge. While there was no guarantee that he would be able to awaken his skills, if he did, it only stood to reason he'd be able to start enchanting with other awakened skills. I'm being paid more than enough to do it with just some magic materials alone, so even if I don't end up managing that, this deal is heavily in my favor. Alright, you've got yourself a craftsman. Just one thing though, whatever amount of materials you get me, I want it to be rainbow mana crystal and in a perfect sphere. An odd request, but shouldn't be much more work for the Earth Spirit, so I see no reason we wouldn't be able to negotiate it. Why though? There's just something I'm curious about, if I can make is all. As the next day wore on, Ben got all of the tasks he needed to out of the way. Braces were made, and he'd found the materials to make the items Quillith requested already in his work area in the morning. So once that was done, he started and finished on that. It wasn't the most exciting, but he'd managed to improve the design of the gun since he'd first made it, even if he was still terrible at using one. The densely woven enchantments on the weapon made for good experience, at least as he pushed himself to get as much power into it as he could, and after making all of the armor to the specifications given, he moved on to 2 different personal projects. The first being to work on the enchantment he'd been slowly making for the small gloves he'd bought during his dinner with Thera the other day, building it up as he went, but mostly focusing on the other enchantment he had in mind, the one he needed a spherical rainbow mana crystal for, pocket-sized job crystal. It had been something in the back of his head ever since he'd had to make one in the Dryad village. He would hate to find himself somewhere that he couldn't conveniently change jobs, making him miss out on all of that experience, meaning that a portable one would be the ideal. The issue was the size and complexity of the enchantment. Unless he wanted to have a typically sized one taking up a bunch of space in his bag, he'd need an excellent quality material to let the enchantment be as small as possible, and of all the crystals in the world, none were of better quality than a rainbow mana crystal. It took some time, but after a fair bit of work, as he stretched both his minds and mana to make both at the same time, he was able to complete them. Ben finished the gloves and the crystal, slipping both into his pockets for later and feeling exceptionally pleased that it had worked out so well. All that was left to do was inform the queen that the armors were complete so she could have them sent out. He left his work area, intending to go right to her but stopping as he saw just what was going on outside. "You're freaking kidding me. Unicorns, really?" A heavily decorated carriage was sitting by the house, with 2 unicorns resting after however long their journey had been, as well as a few elven guards and the driver. He could only assume that their presence had to do with the return of Mercy's companion, but that left him in the awkward place of not knowing what to do. He could probably walk to the room he'd been given to read for a bit, or he could leave to wander the town, maybe visit Thera as she worked on her life magic with her aunt. I mean, whatever's going on is probably happening behind locked doors, if it's even that important to begin with, but I'd still rather avoid it. That carriage is just a little too fancy for my taste to want to run into its occupants. His decision made, he went back to his work area to do something he hadn't had the time for since arriving, reaching into one of the spatial bags and pulling out all of the parts of his disassembled bike, quickly putting the pieces together and riding off through the front gate to enjoy the town a bit, only to be stopped by one of the employees as they came running after him before he could get too far. "I'm sorry, but the queen requests your presence," they called out to him as he weighed in his mind just how much of a bother whatever was going on might be, seriously considering whether he should just keep pedaling and pretend he didn't hear. "No, it's probably fine and I've gotten plenty of help from Pelania. I shouldn't just run off." Feeling resigned, he allowed himself to be led to a sitting room, finding Pelania, Mercy, as well as 3 elves in deep conversation as the succubus who'd led him there bowed her head and made her exit. He felt the eyes of the elves appraising him, which he ignored, instead giving his full attention to Pelania. "Hey, so I got those items done for whenever you want to send them out," he told her, not bothering to question why he was there. "That's excellent. Thank you for your quick work, Ben. But it's pretty clear that wasn't why we called for you. As I'm sure you can tell, Mercy's companion has been returned, so we were hoping you could demonstrate the effectiveness of your new tool. I assumed you'd want to see how it worked out as well to see if it needed any adjustments." "Oh, if that's all then absolutely. I'd actually want to remake it 2 or 3 times to see how well the other enchanters would be able to make it if that's cool with you." "I see no problem with that if you all don't." Mercy easily gave her agreement while the most elegantly dressed of the elves gave a nod of consent. Ben assumed it would be that one that Mercy ate from, but instead another, far plainer one walked up to her, revealing his neck for her to sink her teeth into, which she quickly did after slipping the tool into her mouth. There wasn't much change in the elf's expression. In fact, if anything, he looked slightly disappointed, but he stated the results as he'd experienced them. "I felt none of the effects I'd typically have to fight against. No pleasure from the experience nor force attempting to suppress my thoughts. Given the low amount of dark resistance I have, I'm comfortable claiming it worked." The only change from the other elves was a slight widening of their eyes while Mercy looked gripped with emotion. The long-standing trouble her people faced was solved. It would still be hard, but they could likely find more people who'd be willing to let them feed now, giving them the chance to have their fill. The idea that they'd no longer constantly be on the edge of hunger for the safety of the few who did let them eat was enough to bring tears to her eyes, at least until Ben walked up to her to try and put his hand in her mouth. Wait, what are you doing?" She managed to get out despite her full mouth as she pushed him away. "I already said I want to remake the enchantment at least one more time, so no time like the present. Now stop being a baby. I already had to do this once." "Yes, but there was nobody watching that Tim Dash." Her words were cut off as he slipped a hand into her mouth, connecting to her as he broke down and remade the enchantment, feeling her teeth slice into his flesh again. The fact that it worked while it had a resistance of 80 tied to it, along with the higher level skills, may have shown that he could make it, but what about the other enchanters? That got a bit more difficult when he remade it to more closely match just what he'd expect from them, only putting in a resistance of 13 and only the first level of the 4 skills he could put towards it, even if they weren't quite at the point of being able to enchant with enchantments yet. Once done, he wiped off his hand while politely asking Pelania to treat him as Mercy wiped her mouth before trying again, sinking her teeth into her elven companion and watching his reaction. Immediately Ben could tell it wouldn't be enough. The look in the man's eyes as his blood was sucked took on a level of pleasure that wasn't there before, even if it was subtle. Well, it was far weaker than it would usually be, but I barely needed to resist it. Worse than the one just on it, but an improvement overall. And what's your dark resistance? Ben asked, getting an unexpected answer. Only 3, unfortunately. What? So you've been pushing off the effects of enthrallment through willpower alone. Yes, sadly we elves have a naturally low dark resistance, but the vampires are our kin, with few other races willing to help the strongest of us must face the burden. Ben gave it some thought. He knew that an enthrallment needed a resistance of up to 30, meaning that until some of the other enchanters managed to make significant progress with not only their connect, but enchanting as well, then they might not be able to make items like that for the vampires. Wait, but maybe it's not actually so bad? I mean, most of them can't use connect to enchant with other skills yet, but at least Valeria's able to, and the rest only needs 1 more level. There might be a solution here. So that probably means that for now I'm the only one who can make the enchantments to completely cover a vampire's enthrallment, but it wouldn't be great if I was the only one doing it. If anything happens to me, then there's no more. Of course, if the other enchanters made some, then they'd only be able to partially block it, maybe leaving it in the 10 to 20 range depending on their own dark resistance. If only there was a race with a higher level of resistance and had to naturally be able to put some willpower into not falling under the mental effects of those around them. He wasn't even trying to be subtle with it as he looked to Pelenia, heavily implying that the succubi could offer some help until the enchanters got good enough to cover the full effects of enthrallment. But she in turn was looking not to him or Mercy, but to the well-dressed elf sitting across from her. I have no issue with providing the vampires aid and working to ensure they're safely fed considering there's only a few hundred of them, but I'm not able to do it out of the goodness of my heart. And what exactly are you looking for? The elf asked, his first time speaking since Ben arrived. It seems that even with the braces, a few nations are hesitant to allow the races with passive magic into their lands. In exchange for your support in ensuring we receive the same level of free movement the other races take for granted, as well as perhaps sending over a few of your water mages to help during the hot seasons, I'd have no problem with taking in their entire race. The terms are agreeable. Mercy, do you have any issue with those stated? She shook her head, looking surprised to be addressed at all before the elf carried on. Then it's an agreement. You there, would you be so kind as to bring the item back up to its maximum performance, and then we'll be on our way. He did as he was asked before exchanging their goodbyes. I truly can't thank you enough for what you've done for my people, she told him with a bow. Should you ever find yourself in need, don't be afraid to ask. Don't worry about it. It's been a fun project. Having said that, do you need a bite before you go? He asked, tapping his neck and getting a small laugh. With my companion I'll be fine. I must say, I'll miss the flavor though. Give me another taste should we ever meet again. And Pelenia, thank you for your hospitality. I'll be sure to do my best to repay you when I return. I'll look forward to it, she told her with a smile. And with that everyone left, leaving Ben and Pelenia alone as she slumped down. Gods, those sorts of meetings are always so draining. So who were the other 2 elves anyway? If you could negotiate with them, then they must be important. Really only one was. They were the king and his guard, she explained, dropping a far bigger bombshell than he expected. Even if the vampires don't live among them, the elves still value the connection, no matter how complex the relationship may be. Of course, your little plan to get out of making those for every single vampire gave me some favorable conditions from him as well, so it worked out quite well, I'd say. Still, I hope you don't miss the feeling of such an attractive woman running her tongue down your neck too much, she joked. Please, I know how long a vampire lives, on top of the fact that they share the same agelessness as the elves. If Mercy's their leader, then she must be at the youngest 300, probably a lot more. It is a little bit boring that you know that, but I guess that explains why you gave such little reaction to it. Of course, that can't be said for my dear daughter, Pelenia laughed. She really does become so expressive when you're around. True, Thera didn't seem thrilled with what she'd walked in on the other day, and he hadn't been able to see her much since. Looks like it might be time to talk about that. Ugh, why did I react like that? Something is clearly wrong with me. Ever since she'd walked in on Ben getting his blood sucked and briefly losing control of her mana in the surprise, her thoughts had been a mess. She'd done worse with training with her father, and during the time she spent helping her aunt in the hospital, she'd been needing more guidance to make up for her straying thoughts. Worse was that she kind of understood why. She was jealous. It was a feeling she was used to enough, experiencing it plenty for other succubi with normal levels of charm, and more intensely for the races that were lucky enough not to have it at all. But feeling it like this was new to her, and she didn't understand why seeing that had set her off so much. Even though she was an adult in the eyes of her people, her experiences with any sort of positive relationships outside of her family were few, making her go through situations she never had in the past. Understanding why it just had left her so unhappy was proving to be a struggle. That left her in her current situation, regretting how she acted while not knowing what to do from there, or how to keep it from happening again. I mean, it's not like I don't want Ben having other people in his life. I'm not some possessive psycho, and I even like Steph and Will well enough. Why did it bother me so much? They'd both been so busy since then that they hadn't even been able to talk either, with Ben focusing on his work and herself doing what she could to get the most out of her time there. But that was its own issue. She'd found herself so used to his companionship that without getting to chat for a while she felt lonely, no matter how much she enjoyed her aunt's company. Just one more thing that left her in a poor headspace, but one she wanted to fix. Thera? Lux began, pulling her from her thoughts. Why don't you take a break for the rest of the day? Maybe even go and talk to your friend. She'd cut straight to the heart of the matter, and while Thera wanted to decline, she couldn't deny her head wasn't in it. Maybe a bit of a break would help. Thank you, Lux. She walked out of the hospital, thinking a walk would be good to clear her head when she ran into the very target of her thoughts. Ben, waving wildly from the distance as he biked over to her. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised to see him at the hospitals of all places. Don't tell me you managed to hurt yourself. Looking him up and down, he didn't seem injured, but she couldn't be certain and went to apply her healing magic before he shook his head. No, I'm fine. I finished up everything I'd had to do and figured I'd come see you. Not hanging out for the last couple days has felt unusual, I guess. Wanted to see if you'd be up for a ride around town, since I finally put this back together, he asked as he patted the back of his bike, right behind his seat. It was more of a long, flat bar compared to what he was sitting on, but it didn't look too uncomfortable, and if she were being honest with herself, she was curious about what it was like to ride given the amount of effort he'd put into making it. Sure, I guess that could be fun. And with only a little bit of work to figure out how to actually sit on it, riding side saddle instead of mounting it like Ben had to, they were off. You might want to hold on for safety, he told her as they started to make their way through town. Ben taking it slow for the well-being of themselves and those around them, while Thera was trying to figure out just what she was supposed to hold on to as she tried to keep the speed and lack of control from freaking her out. Hold on to what? Me. I don't want you getting tossed off if I need to hit the brakes. I feel like you should have mentioned that could happen before I got on. She yelled as she, it'll be fine. Now just relax and enjoy the scenery. Let's try some different parts of the city for the day. I feel like I'm always going to the same few places when I'm here. With that, they spent a few hours riding around, stopping occasionally for a snack and carrying on to enjoy the sights. As new as it all was to Ben, plenty was new for Thera as well. With them traveling through parts of her city she'd never bothered to visit herself in all of the time she'd lived there. It was only when they came across a public garden that Ben decided he needed a rest. So they found a bench to sit at while admiring the surrounding flowers. Nice place. I didn't know there was anywhere like this in the city. I didn't either, she agreed, smiling down as she took in the plants around her. She was fairly sure they were all ones that originally hailed from the succubus homeworld, though there were a few she didn't recognize, so she couldn't be certain. A rainbow of colors was blooming around them, and she was able to enjoy them in all of their vibrance, none of the muting that came with having to view them through her cloak. And she couldn't help but look to the person who'd made that possible, only to find him already looking at her. What? Is there something on my face? She said as she looked away, not able to meet his gaze. No. I was just wondering if you're ready to talk about whatever's bothering you? "What makes you think something's bothering me?" she asked, playing dumb despite the fact that she could already feel her blood reaching her cheeks. She just hated how easily he could see through her, all the more so for the fact she didn't have her cloak on. "You seemed put off when you saw me being munched on, and both Myriad and Pelania mentioned that you seemed to be more expressive since then." She couldn't help but cringe. Of course her mother would say something, but she tended to ignore the fact that as an apostle, Ben was typically under the watchful eyes of his God. Since they were always together, then of course she was being watched too. As for his question though, it left her struggling to figure out how to answer, so she didn't, instead leading with her own question. "Do you think you'll be leaving Stonewall soon?" "What? Where did that come from?" "I mean, no matter how much you think you still need to improve, it's obvious various nations are interested in your skills, and at your levels you really don't need to be training under anyone at this point. Besides, it seems like you could get some good rewards if you left." "Maybe, but I really don't want any of that." "In that case, what about Mercy? She seemed interested in you, at least more genuinely than anyone getting their braces made." She hated herself as soon as she said it. Why did that even bother her? The vampire was attractive, even she could tell that. Surely Ben could be happy being involved with someone like that. But the thought was far from pleasant and left her comparing herself to the other woman. Unlike Mercy, who had one of the more standard hominid type forms, she was alone in her appearance, looking more like a well-made sculpture compared to a person because of her heritage. It was never anything that bothered her in the past, but for whatever reason it now circled her mind with her other worries. The only thing that pulled her from her thoughts was Ben's gentle laugh as he took her hand. "I don't want Mercy. Aside from the fact that she's going to be somewhere between 300 and 600 while I'm probably around 20, I think. Either way, I wouldn't run off with someone just for showing me a little interest, and hers was 100% focused on my flavor. I guess I just don't want you to leave Stonewall." Her face burned as she blushed, feeling like she wanted to curl up and die from admitting that. No matter how much she told herself that he had his own life, that if he would one day go off to do what he wanted then it would be fine, that didn't change the fact that she cared for him and that any such parting was going to hurt terribly. She couldn't look him in the eyes as she admitted it, but felt as he put an arm around her shoulders. "You know, I really don't have any reason to leave. Almost everyone I care about is in Stonewall, and let's be real, I'm rich enough now that I don't actually need to sell anything I make. So whenever me and Falk decide my training is done, I can just do what I want with my skills, or I can just sell directly to your mom. She seems like she'd be happy enough with that. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I don't plan on leaving you either, so don't worry about it too much." She raised her eyes just enough to see his red face before looking away again as she ignored her pounding heart. She didn't like being so honest, so open about her feelings, but she couldn't deny that it helped clear the air and put her worries at bay as she felt a small smile touch her lips. "So what did you mean you don't know your age?" she asked when they got back to her family's home. Having enjoyed the ride back once they'd both calmed down. What? In the garden. You said you thought you were around 20, but didn't you say before your people celebrate their birthdays?" "Oh, that." He began awkwardly, making it clear as it always did when she'd hit on a topic that left him feeling complicated. "Well, the days are a bit longer here, but the years are shorter compared to my homeworld. Not to mention on Earth we have these annoying things called leap years that sometimes happen, so I'd have to take the time and do the math to figure out how old I actually am here. It wouldn't be too hard, I guess." But as he trailed off, he gave a small shrug as she squeezed his hand. She couldn't help but feel a little bad when she hit on topics of his homeworld. She could never be sure what would leave him down, but she still wanted to understand, to know more about him if she could. It was only after when she had to figure out just what to say when she fell short. It was only thanks to the intervention of one of the servants that she didn't have to, as one of the maids ran up to her, her cloak in hand. "Lady Thera, it seems Lux is about to give birth. I was asked to hand this to you when you arrive if you'd like to join everyone else in the main hall." "What? Oh, okay." She was able to grasp why she was given the cloak at least. The newborn might not have the resistance to avoid the small amount of charm she still put out. She couldn't put it at risk. The only thing that wasn't clear was why they were going to the main hall instead of the hospital. But instead of wasting time asking, she threw on her cloak as fast as she could and rushed over, Ben following closely behind as she pushed open the doors, only to find her parents, her aunt, and Rit, all seemingly lounging around waiting, making small talk as if nothing was happening. "Ah, Thera, you're finally here," her mother called out. "You two kept us waiting." "Why are you waiting? Auntie Lux, shouldn't you be going to a healer or midwife or something?" At that, the great light spirit let out a small chuckle. "Thera, unlike what your poor mother had to go through with you, I don't have a genuine physical body to get in the way. The baby is fully developed and ready to be born. I simply thought you might like to be here for the birth of the second half spirit in existence. Now please, since everyone's here, come closer and I'll begin." As short and mildly concerning as that explanation was, Thera couldn't help but do as her aunt asked as she and everyone else walked over to witness the birth of the second being like her to come into the world. She didn't know what she was expecting, but it wasn't her aunt simply passing her hands through her stomach, pulling out a baby as she did while Ritz stood to the side, tears in his eyes as he carefully wrapped the child in a blanket before handing it back to its mother. Pelenia let out a low whistle and drew a chuckle from Lux. "Sure wish I had it that easy. The benefits of lacking a fixed form," she said as she cooed over the newborn. "Oh, he's so precious. No wonder the mortals do this. I guess I owe you an apology for telling you to shut up from how you were going on after Thera's birth, Abris. Ha! It is rather different from how our kind regularly does things, isn't it? A lot harder, too. Well, I hope you'll give us plenty of help." "Of course," Pelenia said, barely containing her excitement at seeing the child. "We'll give you all the help you need while you choose to stay with us. It's going to be so nice having such a cutie around since Thera left." With the gleam in her eye clear to see, Lux gestured for the queen to come over, placing the baby in her arms and only making her eyes light up all the more as Pelenia gently rocked it, whispering sweet nothings all the while before handing it back. "Do any of you want to hold him?" Lux asked the rest as Abris quickly rushed over, excited to get his new nephew in his arms, while at the same time Thera took a step back. "I won't get too close. My cloak leaves my hands exposed, so it might not be good if I get too near him." The small bit of exposure hadn't caused issues in the past, at least so long as nobody touched them, but she wanted to be cautious. This was her aunt's child. She'd never forgive herself if being around it caused any harm. At least, that had been her intention. But as soon as she said it, Ben went fishing in his pockets and pulled out a pair of long gloves, shoving them in her hands. "Here, Fanadale gloves. You shouldn't have any issues if you want to hold him." "What?" she asked, shocked that he just had such a thing on him as he shrugged in reply. "I mean, it was pretty obvious you'd need something like this, so I made some in advance. Never forget what a thoughtful and wonderful fiancé I am." She didn't even have it in her to react to his comment as he put on the same playful smile he always did when he joked about being her fiancé. She was just stunned by the turn of events as she looked at Lux and got a nod before she slipped on the gloves as her father handed her the infant. She hadn't had the chance to see many babies up close in her life. She'd always kept some distance to be on the safe side, so she wasn't prepared for just how soft the boy looked. He appeared to take mostly after his father's race more than Lux, being a mostly standard hominid type, with the key distinction being that the horns on his head were glowing with the same purple light that Lux did, and she could vaguely feel the thin tail of an incubus through the blanket. Not a trait of spirits or satyrs, but a characteristic of the form her aunt chose to take. She was surprised at how she felt staring down at him. She was transfixed. How could something so small and cute exist in the world? Not only that, but he was her family, her very first cousin. She could only imagine it was like what the other succubi felt amongst each other. A subtle charm. "What's his name?" "We're going to call him Saren." "Then hello Saren. I'm your cousin Thera." She wasn't sure what people usually did with babies, but she was more than content to simply stare down at him before handing him back to Lux. Oh yes, he wanted to cheer. Level 7 in Connect and Level 5 in Hidden Mind were some excellent results after a few weeks of making braces, along with his little side training of copying everyone's skills onto rings without them realizing. It made going all the way to Analia all the more worthwhile, especially as he finished up the last person scheduled for a brace before he was to go home. The trip had been fun and exciting. He'd gotten a bit more money he didn't really need on top of a few experiences he hadn't expected. Not to mention hundreds of rings his teacher would need to sort out, but it would be good to be done with all of the bribes he'd been offered, those that were subtle as well as those that were less so. Wait, he's still here? As soon as he got the notifications for his levels up, he'd ignored the rest of the world in his joy, but it looked like the last person he was working on, an Exorier who needed their passive fear effect suppressed and was droning on about the wonders of their homeland and the wealth it contained. Yes, you bribe as good as the rest of them, but no thanks. I have other stuff to do, he said as he waved them off, forcing him out of his work area so he could clean and pack up. And now I'm finally free of their nonsense. It is, but it was tiring to get there. Speaking of though, did you ever find out if Sarah was okay? I should probably deal with that before I leave if there's any issues. Whoa, now, I'm exceptionally cute, if she can't see that she doesn't deserve me. He thought to his god as he laughed. He wouldn't be running off to any distant nations just to try and woo someone he barely knew, but at the very least he was flattered. Now I just need to finish up with Thera's parents, pick up the books I ordered, and be on my way. Oh fine, I'll write the last line in your holy text, he said as he pulled the pages from his bag. Yeah, but I could cut that time in half if you let me wait. Fine, you're right, it's not that much longer. Just give me a minute. With pages in hand, he flipped to the last and scribbled out the final line, completing the book. They're done. Any new options for me? Lame, but okay. I'll put it off for now then. Anything else you need from me? I'm feeling it myriad. It's my last day in the nation. I'm getting a win under my belt. Well, not a real win, but something better than the complete loss I'd had until now. Well, looks like it's my win again, Ben. Still, I need to thank you for making things entertaining while you were here at least, Abris said as he pressed a finger against his head, smiling away the entire time as Ben smiled back. Hold on. I wouldn't be so sure about that this time. Look around you. He didn't know what the boy was talking about until he took his focus off him, letting it expand to the area that surrounded him to see a sturdy barrier had been created, running along the ground and creating a dome around them. Since he'd been putting his all into going against Ben, his attention had narrowed too much, and he couldn't be sure if it went up before he touched Ben. But either way, it didn't seem to make a difference. I'm not sure why this would change anything. Your attempt to put up barriers in our past duels has been reasonable enough, but none have stopped me. Well, you aren't wrong about that, but I'm aiming less for my win than your loss. Every part of the enchantment that makes the barrier function is outside of it, so it can't be taken down. I may be trapped, but you are too. He'd thought long and hard about how to beat Abris in a fight given his previous losses, and it was obvious a weapon would be meaningless if the Great Spirit went all out. There simply wasn't any way he could make something that he could use when going against that speed. Barriers were their own problem, with his previous design needing to be placed down to work, but he didn't let that bother him too much. He'd had other ideas for how to do it, it just became an issue of making it work. From there, he made something a little different, shoes. The idea was simple, get the best materials he could to make them and attach a 5th-level enchantment to it, blending it with his earth resistance and other skills before shaping it with a level of complexity he never would have been able to manage back when he only had it to a lower level, while making it so it couldn't be deactivated from the inside, the same sort of mistake he'd made when he first started constructing a shield. It left him trapped as well, and given the design of the shoes with the enchantment activated, if he fell he was almost certain to break his ankles, but he thought he finally had something approaching a win. Abris let out a laugh as he explained and ruffled his hair. Well, whether or not you managed to activate it before I got to you, it was a good idea. There's just one small issue, the spirit said before walking over to it, and with a single punch bringing it down along with Ben's hopes. Ugh, damn it. I really thought I had something there. Ha! Well, it wasn't quite good enough to earn a prize. But next time you come by, I hope you'll impress me even more. I'll do my best. Good. In that case, shall we move on to the main event? Ready, Dad? Thera called out as she walked next to Ben. But did you really need to use that then? If you'd hidden it away, we might have had a chance while he was going easy on us. Yeah, but then I really would have had no hope when I was fighting him. Besides, I have a couple more tricks up my sleeve. Give me a minute, he told her as he reached into his bag, pulling out a small variety of items he'd worked on in the small bit of spare time he had. All attempts for beating Abris as they sparred, all unused as a result of his overwhelming speed and power. As much as it annoyed him, he couldn't make anything good enough to go up against the Earth Spirit as it went all out. Whether he could or not when he was going easier in the name of practice was a whole other matter. With them all ready, Rit called the beginning of the match as everyone began to move. Ben's first instinct was to use a different configuration of the same barrier he'd just used to try and trap Abris, but he resisted in favor of saving it for an emergency. Even if Abris was going easy on them, he'd still been able to destroy Glob's barriers while restraining himself. While Ben was confident in his designs for how they'd be set off, that didn't change the fact that he didn't have the awakened version of the skill, and he'd already seen that it wasn't enough when it came to going against someone so powerful, no matter what other skills he tied into it. Instead, defense was entirely Thera's job as she deflected the Great Spirit's first attack. An earthen saw large enough to easily cut their legs out from under them while she used what she was most confident with herself. An oversized earth bullet, shattering the thin blade with its sheer mass and throwing shards of stone throughout the yard before continuing on towards her father. An attack that he easily sidestepped as she carried out the next. As she distracted him, carrying out blows and defending them from whatever he fired back, Ben did his own part, throwing out all a pile of frisbees he'd made in the early days of their little spars, counting under his breath each time as he did. 3, 2, 1. Okay. It made it that far. Gotta throw a little farther then. The frisbees stopped and hovered in the air as Ben did his best to keep estimating the distance of where each would end up, the delayed activation of their enchantments keeping them in place as Abris focused on Thera until they were able to show their full effect. No matter how much he might have wanted to, he couldn't tie debuffs to them to fill the area. The Great Spirit seemed to have a complete immunity to such things if the fact that Thera's magic had no effect on him was any indication. But there was one thing he couldn't avoid: the passage of time. Inspired by the time spells the ferrets they'd fought during their quest had used, he bound some to each frisbee, creating a small slow field around them while other enchantments kept them in place. It was a horribly wasteful spell and would have been meaningless if Abris was going all out, but this was training. He'd decided on how strong he would be and he would stick to it. There were two main issues with that strategy though. The first being that the effect was weak. He was sure he could have given the spell a bit more oomph if he'd been able to place the entire thing on a sealed room or some sort of contained space, but the little he was giving off as his frisbees radiated it would barely alter the Great Spirit's time. The second, bigger issue was the mana cost. Unlike the first ones he'd created, which he simply made from some decent quality materials before loading them with his mana to let them hover for a while, a time spell like that was big, and as a result each of the frisbees had a rainbow mana battery within it to power it. But even that wouldn't be enough. While the power one contained was massive, especially compared to a white mana crystal, the spell itself simply needed too much while being extremely wasteful on top of it, to the point the battery would run out after only a few minutes compared to anything of a better design that would run almost indefinitely. That gave them a time limit, one they were sure to act on. Even if the effect was less than he hoped, Abris was definitely slowed as he responded to the attacks. He was still managing, but Thera only went harder, firing larger spells faster until she pulled off their main hope for the fight as Ben prepared his own attack. With an effort of will, she ripped long walls of dirt from each side of her father, bringing them together as fast as she could to box him in, giving him two options: go back to avoid it or forward to press on with his attack, and he decided to go further on the offense, rushing towards them despite being slowed by the time spells as Ben took careful aim and fired the shot he'd been lining up. It wasn't good. Pulling the trigger had warped his aim in the end, but the bullet grazed the Earth Spirit, completing their goal and landing a hit. With that, Abris stopped his attacks and they both let out a long sigh of relief. Even if they weren't fighting him at anywhere near his best, a hit was a hit and a victory was a victory.
Svisart?
Why is he so depressed? He's the one that asked for this. I have no idea, Thera answered her father as they both stared at Ben on his hands and knees in front of what he'd asked Abris to make for them after their victory, seemingly dealing with a deep internal struggle. Ben, why does a metal cart have you so upset? It's not the cart, it's what the cart represents, he said as he pulled himself together. Namely, how pointless it was to spend all of that time making a bike. He realized it when Thera had thrown them both around during their guild promotion quest. Her control of her magic was now great enough that they could use something like this to get around, a cart with a couple of seats in the front and plenty of room in the back for storage, able to be driven through her magic so long as it was made of metal. He explained it all and watched as her eyes lit up before getting on, completely ignoring his depression about the bike, and with staff in hand moving it forward and directing it as she went. "Okay, this is the best idea you've ever had," she told him excitedly as she got off, seeing that it would work as well as he seemed to think. "It's hard to express just how many better and more important ideas I've had than this, but I'm glad you're happy with it at least. Since moving it comes down to your own power, it shouldn't need to stop so long as you're awake, and it won't be limited to the speed and needs of animals. Honestly, I'm hopeful it can cut the time going from the gate to Stonewall down to around 2 days, but I guess we'll see. Then let's get going. I want to try this out." She laughed, eager to see how things would go with it. With everything they needed to do basically done, they said their goodbyes to her family, Thera placing special emphasis on saying goodbye to her baby cousin before she put on her cloak, and they went on their way off to collect all of the books Ben had ordered. "This is insane. You're insane. How are you going to ever read all of these?" Thera asked as she watched him pile crates of books into the back of the cart, suddenly understanding why he'd asked for so much space when something smaller would have been more convenient for them. "They're mostly for reference if I ever need them, but I'm also going to work on getting the speed reading skill at some point. Combining it with my other skills should make reading a book a day a breeze. You know, one day your brain is going to blow up if you keep gaining mind skills. And while everyone's mourning you, not a single person is going to be surprised. With how Myriad keeps telling me nothing the system does is harmful, I'm pretty sure I'll get away without any damage. Fine, then your mind is going to keep warping and changing until it's unrecognizable. No damage, just the weirdest thing in existence." Myriad want to refute that? "Damn. Told you," she said as she laughed, getting all the context she needed from his reply before they started making their way through the city towards the gate. He had to admit a part of him would miss the city. Analia was a nice place and there was plenty to do to keep himself occupied there. And even if they could drive Thera nuts, he liked her family's company too. It was a place he wanted to make sure he visited again when he got the chance, though it couldn't counter the pleasures of home. It was only as he was taking his last looks around as they slowly made their way to the gate that something caught his eye. A light in a side alley that he initially paid no mind to, but as they drifted further and further away it continued to pick at his thoughts, until his eyes opened wide and he called for her to stop as he ran back. He hadn't seen a light, not really. Though it seemed similar, it was something that would only catch his eye, with nobody else seeming to notice or care. The reason was simple too, they just couldn't see it. It would be invisible to anyone unless they managed to have a good mana sense that was specialized towards enchantments. He wasn't sure if he was right at first, but the moment he found himself at the mouth of the alley he was salivating. Whatever was there wasn't just a heavily enchanted item. It was one with some much magic placed on it. He could see it from down the street. There was only one possibility that sprang to mind, but he didn't dare give voice to the thought, nonetheless feeling confident as he approached. A mythic item. The only other thing he'd seen that had been as impressive was the enchantments on Analia's trial. But this was different. Well, he didn't actually know what it was, most of it being covered by an old cloth, but it was far smaller, meaning it was even harder to make, at least in a way that could exist outside of the realm of gods. A part of him worried about whoever left it there, that they might come back as he was looking it over and not take too kindly to having something so rare and extremely expensive examined so casually. But he couldn't resist himself as he pulled the cloth away to get a better look. Excitement turned to confusion, though, as he tried to understand just what he was seeing. Before him was a mountain of a man. He'd have been 8 or 9 feet tall when not curled up into a ball, with flesh that Ben was almost certain was made of bronze. But that was far from the most significant thing about the man. Ben had gotten to see plenty of races since coming to the world after all, and seeing someone who seemed to be made of metal wasn't too shocking given his connection to both Thera and Abris. No, what left him struggling to understand just what he was seeing was the dense quantity of slowly fraying enchantments covering every inch of the man's flesh and breaking down before his very eyes. As he came back to consciousness after drifting in and out for days, the elderly being found himself somewhere different from the back alley he'd collapsed in. He was lying in a bed in a large room and knew that someone must have found him. But as he opened his eyes and looked around, the people he was seeing weren't succubi. Are you sure there's nothing you can do for him, Lux? He saw a young man ask a creature that seemed to be made of light, only to get a shake of her head in reply. I'm sorry, Ben, but this is really more your specialty than mine. He's not alive. What do you mean he's not alive? He has bodily functions. He has a soul. I wouldn't be able to connect to him otherwise, and I can definitely feel the skills attached to it. I can't speak for that, but if it is the case, then the body is just a vessel for it, basically a golem, though I couldn't say what it's made of. We could try to get Abris to have a look, but I don't think much of it would be affected by an earth affinity. From what I can tell, the structure of the body breaking down is less of a problem than the enchantments collapsing, so if you can't do anything, I doubt he could either. I don't know how old he is, but it's been a long time since he's had proper maintenance. It was at that he finally spoke up, making them aware he was conscious and immediately pulling their eyes to him. Where am I? You're in Analia, in the residence of the Queen. The boy, Ben, if what the light creature said was correct, told him. It was an answer that should have lightened his heart, but he knew things had progressed too far. Still, for the sake of those he loved, he had to address the reason he'd come. That's good news then, he said, trying to nod but failing. I'd come to beg the help of the master enchanter who's rumored to be staying here. As the two standing above him shared an uneasy look, he couldn't help but feel justified in not letting himself get his hopes up. He felt his thoughts expand as he went to take a break after the hours of work he'd just gone through, straining his minds and skills in ways he didn't think possible. It didn't leave him with an extra mind, but helped to ease the burden of trying to repair the being he'd come to know as the Talos Inyx. Having done the best he could for the time being, he went out to the living room where everyone was waiting. When he'd realized that what he found was more than a little unusual, they'd returned to Thera's family with him in tow, hoping to get Lux's help in healing him to figure out just what to do. That was when they discovered the problem, learning more as they spoke in his few minutes of consciousness. While whether he was alive or not was a debate Ben didn't care about, it was clear that healing spells didn't work. The reason being that his body had been entirely artificially constructed by a god and designed to be a weapon, something to fight and defend the people of his homeworld before it was lost like so many others. Were you up all night? Thera asked in concern, leaving him to give her an awkward smile. Even now I shouldn't be leaving his side. The enchantments that seemed to keep him alive. Well, it's bad. If what he said was true, then the god that made him is dead. And even if it wasn't, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything, so he's been falling into a state of decay for centuries. I don't suppose you've had any luck finding Falk. Ben knew he wasn't good enough to deal with this. The enchantments were like nothing he'd ever seen before. While they had the familiar weaving structure that Analia seemed to use as well, that didn't mean he knew what they were supposed to do. Worse was the fact that the complexity was so extreme that even his upkeep was barely doing anything. The only reason he'd been able to do the little he could was thanks to the buffs to his mana and regeneration that Lux had applied to him. It seemed that Inyx had come there specifically because of the same rumors Mercy had believed, that there was a master enchanter around who might be able to help him, but unlike the vampire, he had a completely different problem, one that couldn't be solved with the right knowledge and clever application of skills. It needed a level of expertise and technique that he simply didn't possess, leaving him only one person he could think to turn to. Unfortunately for everyone, Pelania shook her head. I've sent people to try to locate him anywhere I think likely, as well as sent some to monitor the gate and head to Stonewall in case he'd gotten back early, but it may be a while and he never did like to share much about his clients. We may not find him any time soon. He grit his teeth. From the hours he'd spent watching him, he knew that the Talos didn't have much time. His body was breaking down. There was nothing he could do to stop it, only slow it down. Even trying to get Falk was grasping at straws. He knew, from what he could tell, the enchantments that made up his body pulled from all affinities as well as non-affinity magic. No matter how much Falk was keeping from him about his status, he wouldn't be able to use everything. Still, maybe if we work together we could manage. I just need to keep the guy alive until then, and we can at least try something. All right, then I need to get back to it in the meantime. Sorry, Thera, but I don't think I can move him again, so I'll have to stay here a while. Don't worry about it. There's no real rush to get back to Stonewall anyway, so I can just practice more with Dad. Cool. And Lux, I'm sorry, I know you have a baby to deal with and all, but do you think you could buff me occasionally? The ones I apply should last for an entire day. I'll make sure to stop by when I can to help. The light affinity buffs of a great spirit were nothing to scoff at, providing a massive boost to both his mana pool and regeneration rate while they were applied. While he would normally never use something like that, no matter how useful it might seem on account of the fact that it would inhibit his own growth rates in those areas while applied, he couldn't be picky about it now. "Thank you," he told the spirit, giving them all a nod before running back to work on the ancient automaton. Standing over its unconscious form, he wanted to think of it as asleep but knew that wasn't quite right. Asleep implied it was resting, but it was more like it had been powered off. At least he was pretty sure it wasn't dreaming, but he didn't have a firm enough understanding of just what the enchantments in it were supposed to do to be confident of that. Who am I kidding? I can't be confident about any of this. At best I can keep fixing things before they break, but I can't put back together what's already broken, at least not the way it originally was. Maybe I can make some other enchantments to fill the gaps without affecting what's already there. But at the same time, there's no way anything I make wouldn't just be pulled apart by the decay of the rest of it, so what's even the point? That doesn't mean I shouldn't try though. I can't just let someone die in front of me. I felt a mind and skills when I connected with him myriad. Besides, he came here to ask for help. That's alive enough for my books. The god said with a sigh. Funny, with everything I've heard about the invaders, I'd say the same thing of this world. But that hasn't stopped you guys from trying. I want to do what I can. If nothing comes of it, then oh well. But for now, just give me some help. We know he has a soul and we can assume it functions the same as any living beings, but it's bound to an artificial body. You're basically the same thing at a much larger scale. Do you have any ideas that might help? Fantastic, he thought dryly. In that case, at least bounce some ideas around with me. I can only glean a bit from his internal structure from the enchantments, but it looks like everything flows back and forth from a central core at his heart. What do you think? Maybe a power source? I could see using a large rainbow mana crystal to keep everything running, but something about that idea just doesn't seem right. He did his best to hold back a sigh. He thought he'd be well on his way home by now, not holding someone's life in his hands in a situation where he was all but certain to not be able to help. Still, being discouraged would do nothing for him. Instead, he focused on multitasking, discussing things with Myriad while at the same time trying to maintain the failing enchantments while he unraveled just what each was for in the hope he could make the repairs he needed. He didn't know how many hours of work passed, but he only stopped as Inox opened his eyes. "So I'm still alive it seems," the Talos said with a chuckle. "I'm grateful that there's someone to be by my side till the end. I didn't want it to be the Melee, it would hurt them too much, but to perish alone is a sad thought." "Don't be such a downer," Ben told him, trying to sound positive. "Even if I'm not a master enchanter, when we find my teacher we might be able to do something. Just be patient. Child, even coming here was a slim hope at the behest of the race I serve. I've seen enough specialists and enchanters over the years to know there's nothing to be done. That doesn't mean you should give up." "I'm not giving up. I'm giving in. Time comes for everyone. In all of the millennia I've seen, I've gotten to know that fact better than anyone. I appreciate that you're trying, but all I really need is some company for my final days. I know it may be a bit much to ask as we've just met, but if you'd fill that role, I'd be grateful. Well, either way, I'll be sticking around, so don't worry. At the very least, I'm not going to let you die without trying anything. But if you do, I'll be here." "Thank you," he said as he closed his eyes, making Ben think he was asleep again until he spoke up. "But you really don't need to waste your energy. If your mana sense is good enough to see the enchantments that make up my form, you can focus on studying them while some are still whole instead. It would be a better use of your time. I have a lot of mind skills. I can do both easily enough." "Then you still shouldn't waste your energy," he gently argued. "Though the Melee would never admit it, I and my brothers were failures. We couldn't protect our world, nor fight off the invaders. All we could do was run, sacrificing ourselves one by one to keep them safe. Even now, so close to our dream of revenge, it's clear that my presence would make no difference. I wouldn't be able to help this world in a meaningful way. I have no value." Ben fell silent, leaving Inox to believe he was thinking it over, at least until he spoke up. "Who cares? he said quietly. What? I said, who cares? Why does it matter if you can fight or not? Why do you only have value if you can throw yourself into the war? Isn't it okay just to exist? To continue on just because you want to? I'm sure your Millie would agree. Ah, I see I've upset you, child. I apologize. It's fine, he said as he calmed himself down. You're right that I probably won't be able to do anything, but at least let me try. All right, I suppose at the end it does me no harm. Since it seems like I may be up for a while, why not tell me your story? He asked Ben, gently changing the subject. There's not much to tell. I'll be the judge of that. All right, so long as you tell me yours. I bet it will be a fair bit longer than what I have, though. The Talos agreed, seeming to try to smile as Ben began. Well, I guess my story begins on a little world called Earth. She fell to the dirt, her father's last attack knocking her to the ground and leaving her breathless as he made his way over to her. Looks like it's my win again, he said with a grin as she shot him a glare. Haven't you been going way harder on me? She asked, annoyed. In the 3 weeks since she'd planned to go back to Stonewall, she'd used that extra time to train with her father some more to get as many levels to her job as she could. But with each passing day, it felt like he was using more and more strength. Hey now, you managed to get a hit in before, right? I need to make sure you get plenty of challenge, so I adjust appropriately. She couldn't help but think her father just didn't like to lose, but with nothing to back that up, she tried to push the thought aside and relax. That was their last one for the day anyway, and she had other things to do. Dusting herself off, she made her way to, Sweetheart, I think we need to talk about your friend. I'm just bringing him some food now. What's up? Lux is concerned. She felt her heart gripped in panic as she asked what was wrong. Her aunt was the great light spirit. If even she thought he wasn't doing well, then it had to be something major. She was only able to let out a breath of relief as she got the answer. Exhaustion, the boy is working himself to death. Apparently, she's been healing him when she goes in the morning to be on the safe side, but that doesn't change the fact that he's in a constant state of exhaustion. She doubts that he's sleeping more than an hour a night. Oh, is that all? She said dismissively. Then he's fine, he does that all the time, it's not a big deal. I wouldn't be so sure. Just because he's used to pushing himself, doesn't mean he can't take it too far. People die doing less. Well, I'll talk to him, but I'm sure it's fine. If you saw the way he worked with Uncle Falk, you'd understand. I'm pretty sure he'll only be happy if he succeeds in working himself to death. Her mother still looked concerned, but left it at that as Thera went off to make sure her friend remembered to eat. It wasn't entirely uncommon for a task to absorb him that much, but it usually fell to her uncle to make him take a break. Until he could be found, that role had fallen to her. When she'd gotten to the room where the Talos laid, the first thing she noticed was Ben's apparent absence. Did he actually take a break by himself? She thought with some humor, unable to believe that would happen, and decided to go look for him until something caught her eye. A foot on the ground, just barely peeking out past the edge of the bed. Her mother's worries suddenly gripped her heart as she dropped the food and ran to his side, finding him unconscious on the floor. She didn't know what to do, checking his pulse in a panic and rushing to apply the few healing spells she thought could help as a voice beside her spoke up. Don't be too concerned. The work he's been doing has just caught up to him. He needs some rest. She jumped, startled as she'd forgotten that she wasn't strictly alone. But the Talos in the room hadn't been conscious any of the previous times she'd come by to check on him. Once she let herself relax a bit, she knew he was right, but that was plenty worrying in its own way. Ben had fallen asleep in the shop plenty of times, but as far as she knew, he'd never done it in the middle of a task. She didn't think she had the physical strength to lift him to the bed for a better rest, instead gently laying him out, resting his head on her legs as she placed a hand on his cheek and chest, gently applying her life spells to do what little help she could. Even if he was fine, she couldn't help but feel her mother's same worry after walking into that. Once again, Inox broke the silence. You're Thera, correct?
Yam.
Has Ben mentioned me? Quite a lot, I'd say. For someone who said there wasn't much to tell of his life, he's lived through quite the exciting one, don't you think? With how much he talked about his time with you, I'd say you have as well. Well, You probably heard the better parts of it if he only told you about what came after meeting him, she said as she rubbed Ben's head, looking down on him as worry painted her face before addressing the Talos again. Are you at least starting to feel better? She'd thought that with all Ben was doing that it would have been worthwhile in the end, that even if it wasn't much he'd be making progress. But that thought was quickly dashed. No, there's nothing he can do to keep me alive. At best he's buying me a few extra days as he beats himself into the ground. I'd wanted a companion for my end, and it's been a pleasure getting to know the boy. But when he wakes up you should pull him away, have him dragged off if you have to. I wouldn't see him work himself to death when there's nothing that can be done. The answer froze her heart, but she knew she wouldn't be able to do anything to stop him. There's no point in trying. Once he gets his heart set on a project, he doesn't like to give it up unless he's sure it's impossible. The child knows it's impossible, he said gently. He just doesn't want to admit it. His company has helped make my final days more enjoyable. I'd appreciate it if you let him know that. Inox fell silent, leaving Thera to fear the worst. But it seemed he'd just lost consciousness as he'd been prone to doing since they found him, leaving her the smallest amount of relief as she stared down at her friend. She didn't know what the right choice would be. She knew that he wouldn't want to quit till the end, but craftsmen weren't the types that were meant to deal with terminal patients. He was working himself past the point of exhaustion, and she didn't want to find him passed out again. What am I even supposed to do? She thought to herself as she kept rubbing his head, waiting for him to wake up. Thera? What's going on? He asked as he woke up after a few hours, letting her breathe a sigh of relief she'd been holding despite herself. What's going on is that you passed out while you were working. I found you unconscious on the floor. Crap. How long have I been out for? At least a few hours. Shit. He tried to rush up to get back to work, but she placed a firm hand on his chest, keeping him in place. Thera, I kind of need to get back to it. If I've been asleep for hours, then everything I built up and repaired today has probably already decayed away. Ben, I spoke to him while you were asleep, she said gently. He said there's nothing you can do and you know it. He doesn't want to see you work yourself to death in his final days. He's probably right, he admitted after a moment of silence. But I don't want to give up. Ben. Thera, please. I know I can't do it, but I at least want to try till the end. You're working yourself too hard. Before now, how long has it been since you've slept? Ben. 3 days, maybe 3.5. She took a breath before saying anything. This entire time she'd just assumed he was treating this like any other project. But the urgency of it all was clearly weighing on him more than she'd thought. Ben, you need to eat, you need to rest. Please, I don't want to see you getting hurt doing this. He didn't respond, just gently took her hand as he thought over what she said as he saw the worry in her eyes. He knew he was going too hard, but he couldn't make himself stop, at least not until... Boy, why in the infinite hells am I being told by Pelenia and Lux you're working yourself to death? Her uncle, Ben's teacher, yelled as he entered the room. Well, hopefully I can ease up a bit now that you're here, Ben said with cheer as Thera released him and he got up. You know, you're a hard man to find. And you don't give me a break, Falk shot back. You look terrible. How long have you been working for? I just had a nap, so I'm pretty good for now, don't worry. Now come on and give him a look with me already. He pulled his teacher over to the unconscious automaton and couldn't help but cringe at what he saw. In the hours he'd slept, all of his hard work had been destroyed by the enchantment decay and had gotten worse from there too. He looked at Falk, wanting to ask if he could do anything to help, but his teacher was already absorbed, leaning in to examine each and every enchantment, poking and prodding Inox with his large hands, trying to figure out how everything worked together as he went. Even as he went, Ben saw him occasionally apply enchantments of the earth and death affinities he had access to, stopping only to watch them decay before moving on to a different part of his body and trying again, all the while repairing the fraying enchantments that had come apart when Ben had fallen asleep. He worked in silence the entire time, patiently devoted to his work as he went before ultimately heaving a heavy sigh. There's nothing I can do, boy. I'm sorry. What? Falk, there must be something. Even if you beat around the bush about it, you obviously have awakened skills. If we work together then maybe dash. He's an mid-mythic item boy, his teacher said as he cut him off. Maybe if you were on the verge of getting to the 3rd tier with a few of your skills, you'd be able to do something for him, but that's the only way he could be fixed. Otherwise, there'd need to be someone who managed to have awakened magics of every affinity along with enchanting. People like that simply don't exist. No matter how good I am, I wouldn't be able to do anything, even if I were to make it into the 3rd tier myself. As his teacher spoke, he couldn't help but deflate. If Fox said so, then he was sure it was accurate, but that meant there was no option to repair the enchantments. He could only stare down at the Talos before him, Fox placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, while Thera squeezed his arm before both walked off to give him some time alone. As the hours passed while he stood there, he watched more and more of the enchantments that made up Onyx's body decay and break. He didn't try to stop it, only waiting for the Talos he'd found to open his eyes for what might be their final conversation. When he finally did, his voice was as gentle as ever. I take it things aren't looking good? My teacher came, but he said it wouldn't be possible unless I was on the verge of getting to the 3rd tier. Sounds about right. Awakened enchanters have never been able to do much in the past for my brothers, sadly. How long do you think I have? A week, 2 weeks maybe if you're lucky. Do you want me to contact anyone for you? I could send word to the Melee if you'd like. Heck, I have nothing going on. Thank you, but I'd rather not. I said all of my goodbyes before I left. We all knew that chances were best I wasn't coming back. Thank you, though, for trying all of these weeks, for talking with me too. As far as last days go, these were some good ones. Ben hesitated for just a moment, not wanting to give voice to what needed to be said. He hated the option as soon as he'd thought of it, not wanting to even consider it as anything but a last resort. Unfortunately, that was the point they were at. During all of the time I'd worked on you, I'd been doing my best to study the enchantments that made up your body as I went, he began. My God and I are fairly confident that you have a core that houses your soul, a sort of container that keeps it safe while letting it interact with the rest of your body to make it move. Ah, interesting. My maker never divulged much information on my design to me, but I'd always just assumed that my soul filled this vessel. I must say, though, I wonder why I was put together like this. It seems like a rather obvious weakness. I'd assume it's because there's limited ways for inorganic materials to house a soul, but that's not the point. The god I represent, Myriad, he's actually very similar, just on a larger scale. He was originally a container for the souls of his entire race that eventually ascended to godhood. In a similar vein, I've been studying how to make something that could contain a soul. The idea was that I could tie the effects of the beast form skill to it so that anyone wielding the item could take advantage of it. An interesting idea. I hope your time studying me has proven useful to that goal then. I would say it has. I'm still pretty far off of where I'd need to be to do it. I think I'd need an awakened skill or two. That doesn't mean there's nothing I could do now though. Especially when there's a vessel right in front of me that wouldn't need to be created, just modified to keep the soul within contained. He looked into the Onyx's eyes as he stared back. So you want to try trapping my soul then? I wanted to give you the option, he clarified. To be completely honest, there's a lot of reasons I think you shouldn't. My levels are still far lower than I'd like to have them for doing something like this. I'm almost certain to fail. Aside from that, there's the fact that I'd have to do it soon if I'm going to at all. But that would basically mean ending your life far earlier than expected for something that might not even work. Finally, there's the issue of your mind. I don't know if it's contained in the same location as your soul or if they're joined at all. At worst, if you're ever brought back, it might not even be you. Or maybe the worst option is that your mind may be trapped too, doomed to slowly go insane. I think you're forgetting the issue with the obvious goal, the idea that someone would one day gain the skill to not only make me a new body but even remember to do it. If I did do this, I'm confident that the core enchantments you already have keeping your soul in place would decay in at most a century after I alter them, he said with a shake of his head. It would give me that much time to try and figure something out for you, but that's it. After your soul could go off to wherever they end up. This is just to create some time to figure something else out. I'm not going to ask you to do this. I wouldn't want to do this in your place. I just wanted to tell you it's an option. The Talos was silent for long enough that Ben worried he'd fallen unconscious again. But after much thought he spoke. I promised the Melee, specifically the young girl in charge of taking care of me, that I wouldn't give up. Such an easy request to make and a hard one to fulfill, especially when at the end of my life, but I never did want to let them down if I could help it. All right, Ben, do what you need to. If I have even a small chance of being able to fulfill my purpose and keep them safe, then I'll do it. As serious as he was when he agreed, it gave Ben no joy. He'd grown to like Enix beyond just being an interesting creation, and this was by far the worst option they could have had. Still, he was the one who put out the offer, he would see it through. I understand. In that case, I'll go get everything ready. Just wait here, he said as he was about to run off, only to be stopped. Wait. What's up? Changed your mind on sending a letter? No, he said with a small chuckle. I'll hold on to the hope that I'll see them again in person. I was just hoping you'd stay until I lose consciousness again. This may be my last time awake with anyone to talk to after all. I'd rather not spend these moments alone. Of course, he told him while taking a seat on the edge of the bed, trying to put on a happier face. In that case, what do you want to talk about for the time being? Let me tell you about the Golden Plains by the ocean of my world, the place I first opened my eyes. Once Enix was unconscious again, he left to find everyone else, specifically Abris and Pelania, to beg a favor. They, along with Thera and Falk, were in the living room, talking over drinks, though with a dark atmosphere above them. It was his teacher who first spoke up when he entered, trying to be supportive. Come to terms with everything you needed to, boy? Sort of. I spoke to him about it. It was what he expected from the start, so I don't think he was bothered. But we want to try one last thing. Boy, there's nothing you can do, Falk gently told him. I know you aren't one to give up on something so easily, but you're going to burn yourself out. I know there's nothing I can currently do, but I have a single option to buy enough time to figure something out. If it works, then it will give me decades to either come up with a solution or pass on the task. And if not, well, it's an option with a lot of finality to it. If it doesn't work, he'll be dead. The room's mood only darkened more as Falk only nodded. If he's agreed and is gonna pass soon anyway, then I won't try to stop you. Could you use a hand? Unfortunately, it's pretty dependent on having at least a bit of knowledge on how to seal a soul, so I'll have to do it myself. I'd like to buy a few materials for it, if that's all right. He asked Thera's parents, getting a nod from Abris as Pelania spoke up. What will you need? A fist's worth of mithril, half as much white mana crystal, and an orichalcum knife with the sharpest edge you can make me. All right, we'll provide you with all of that. But in the future, we'll ask you to make us something to the best of your abilities. Agreed? Sure. Sounds like a deal, he said, breathing a small sigh of relief. Even though Abris was able to make them with his mana, he knew the cost of materializing something was high, all the more so for magic materials. He'd been expecting to pay a heavy price. A trade like that was nothing. In that case, I'll just need a hand bringing him down to the work area. All right, Abris dear, give him a hand carrying him down. I'll get the materials you need from storage. With everything decided, they parted ways, each off to fulfill their own task. By the time they'd brought Enix down, Pelania had already come by with the materials he'd needed, leaving Abris the last task of changing a lump of orichalcum into a razor-sharp knife with his magic. The greatest benefit of the metal was that it could only be affected by magic, so any cuts made with it wouldn't dull the blade. But to be sure that no mana had the chance to either, he applied all of his resistances with his enchanting, before heating up the forge to begin warming the mithril and cutting the white mana crystal to the shapes and sizes he'd need. Once the mithril was heated enough, he took it out and began hammering, working to get the shape as perfect as he could given what he could already tell of Enix's core. Without cutting him open to see it, he could only base it off the arrangement of the enchantments coming off of it. He'd likely have to make some modifications when he actually saw it, but by then time would be of the essence. He wanted to at least have a close framework to build upon before anything else, a container that would hold it as well as it possibly could before moving on to the next step. God, I wish I could grow more hands. Things are about to get hectic. He took his god's advice, putting everything down to focus solely on his breathing. He'd only get one shot to do everything right the first time. If he panicked, if his hands weren't steady, if he made a single mistake, it would all be pointless. All he could do was try and relax while devoting his entire focus to his task. He felt his heart rate lower as he calmed down, before picking up the orichalcum knife and carefully cutting into the Talos chest. As a body that was constructed of metals and various materials he couldn't identify compared to the flesh and blood of a person, there wasn't as much mess associated with the act as he'd expected, nothing like blood or oil leaking out with the cut, and it gave him the confidence to keep going, making careful slices while peeling away layers, doing his best to avoid harming anything that looked immediately vital to the core until it was before his very eyes. His cuts had been clean and his precision rang true, leaving him with more wiggle room than he dared to hope as he inspected it. While he wasn't positive about any of the materials that made up the Talos body, this was the most mysterious of all. A sphere of what seemed like diamond at first glance from the way it glittered in the light. It was firm to the touch, but less like a gem would be, more comparable to an apple than anything else he could think of, with a dull, shifting glow moving about within on top of multiple nodes protruding from its surface, ranging from purple to green in color. It was those very nodes he needed to be the most careful of, but he managed to separate them from the surrounding materials without cutting any, giving him the time to go back to the mithril container, making the adjustments to its shape and size before carefully placing the mana crystals, arranging them in a way to match each node's location when they'd be placed within. From there, all that was left before sealing the core was placing the enchantments, the part that gave him the greatest worry. While he'd been theorizing on how to seal a soul, getting advice from Myriad and constructing his own theories, he hadn't put them to practice yet. Now here he was, already modifying a design he wasn't even sure would work in order to ensure the enchantments of the core continued to do their job, just with a little extra help. As useful as this experience would be to him for the future, for the time being he could only wish there was something else he could have tried it on first. With any delay being a chance for something to go wrong, he pushed away the worry to focus on the enchantment he was building. Pulling from every affinity ring on his hand, he twisted and shaped the mana, blending some of it together while weaving others, all in a way he could only have achieved thanks to the buffs placed on him by Lux, at least at the speed he was doing it at. He felt sweat form on his brow as he concentrated, making sure every part was perfect before he placed them down. It didn't have to be the level of perfection it would take to seal a soul by itself, it just needed to help what was already there. It was only as the last part went down that he realized he'd barely taken a breath for the entire process, feeling the oxygen flood into him as he looked at what he'd made. It was perfect, at least as perfect as he could produce, meaning there was only one more thing for him to do. With the container in one hand and the knife in the other, he ever so carefully cut through where the nodes of the core connected to the rest of the body, separating it as it began bleeding mana, only to quickly and carefully place it into the container, sealing it shut. He let himself feel a small bit of gratitude that all of those notifications hadn't gone off as he was in the middle of any of his work before staring at the container itself. What do you think, Myriad? Did it work? He grimaced a bit but tried not to let it get to him. 50 years would still be plenty compared to the few short weeks that he initially had, and there was bound to be a solution. Just because Falk thought that he would only be able to do something if he was on the verge of making it to the third tier didn't mean he couldn't find another option if he looked for it. As long as he managed to awaken his skills and continued to collect higher-leveled skill rings, he would eventually be able to come up with something. He just had to keep believing. It's good to aim high, gives me a goal to work towards. On that note, let's see just what options I have that can help me with that. He thought as he slipped his hand into his pocket, gently touching the miniature job crystal he'd made and feeling the options appear to him. Available jobs: Trap User, Tree Tamer, Craftsman Alchemy Path, Craftsman Artistic Path, Craftsman Blacksmith Path, Craftsman Cooking Path, Craftsman Stonecrafts Path, Craftsman Sewing Path, Heretic, Holy Craftsman, Kin, Tank, a Mathematician, Fractured Mind User, Adventurer, Cursed Item Maker, a High Craftsman, a High Enchanter. Of all the options, four were new with one being wholly unexpected. I get Adventurer and High Enchanter since I met the qualifications, and it looks like the job book I flipped through was right about being able to fill the requirements for unlocking High Craftsman with my last two jobs. But do you know anything about Cursed Item Maker? Myriad let out a long sigh. Okay, cool. I'm pretty sure I know what I'll be aiming for with my next 2 jobs anyway, but maybe I'll consider it after that. For the time being though, I'll be taking High Enchanter. Name, Ben Hef. Race, human. Titles, Apostle of Myriad, The Forgotten One, Miracle Maker, Skill Learner. Jobs, High Enchanter, LV3. Previous jobs, Apprentice Craftsman, Craftsman, Priest, Enchanter, Mind User, Magic Item Maker, Magic Weapon Maker. Attributes, a Vitality, 191. A Vitality Recovery Rate, 2 per hour.
Mana, 130.
Mana Recovery Rate, 7 per minute. Strength, 197. Agility, 85. Stamina, 705. Intelligence, 396. Affinities, Light 3. Life 2. A Fire, 4. Water 3. Air, 4. Earth 2. Death 3. Dark 1. Space, 4. Time 5. Resistances, Light, 68. Life, 72. Fire, 75. Water, 69. Air, 66. Earth, 81. Death, 78. Dark, 85. Space, 63. Time, 61. Blessed skills, Crafting LV8. Enchanting LV7. Focus LV7. Passive skills, World Speak Plus. Tolerance LV2. Sacrilege LV3. Complex Mind LV4. A Bind. Partial Demonic Body. Defense Enhancement LV1. Parallel Thought LV2. Ambidexterity. Absorption Resistance LV0. Enchanting Knowledge LV3. Active Skills, Dismantling LV4. Stealth LV1. Connect LV7. Hidden Mind LV5. Calculate LV3. A Knife Wielder LV0. A Hammer Wielder LV0. Meditation LV1. Cycling LV0. Marksmanship LV0. Blessings. A Myriad's Blessing. Anilia's Blessing. Trials. Trial of Analia and Talona. Okay, not that I'm complaining, the fact I just got enchanting knowledge with the job is fantastic. But why was it at the 3rd level already? It was an incredible boon to him to receive with the job. When almost all of his goals depended on improving his enchanting, a knowledge skill related to it would do nothing but help. He just couldn't understand getting it at anything other than level 0. At the very least, he'd never heard of such a thing. Luckily for him, his god was still around to shed some light on things. Wait, then don't I have the complete opposite issue now? I have enchanting at the 7th level, why would my knowledge only be at level 3? He didn't have any illusions that he didn't still have plenty to learn, but only being level 3 felt low considering all he made and knew how to make, with his god seeming to agree. Awesome, thanks Myriad. With his job change done, he looked down at the container in his hand. He'd done all he could hope to for the time being. It was time to go home. Are you sure you don't want to ride with us, Uncle? She asked as they prepared to part ways at the gate. I originally only came back to tell you all that I'd be delayed by a month. The client had more work for me than expected, so the sooner I go deal with it, the sooner I get home. Just be safe driving that thing, would you? Don't worry. It's actually super easy, she told him enthusiastically, the smile on her face hidden by her cloak now that they had to leave. Aside from training with her father, she'd taken to practicing moving the carriage with her mana as well, and was finding it far more enjoyable than she'd expected. It left her feeling a level of freedom that she usually only enjoyed while she was hunting, but it felt like the world had opened up to her now that she had this. He didn't look convinced but wished them well after extracting a promise from him that he'd make her be careful, and with that they were on their way. Jesus Christ, Thera, slow down, Ben yelled as she drove the carriage down the empty dirt road between the gate and Stonewall. As soon as she'd gotten out of the city and didn't have to worry about any other carriages blocking her way, she decided to see just how fast she could go. And she couldn't help but be thrilled with the results despite his complaints. Don't worry so much. I'm just getting us back a little faster than expected. I think we can cut the time down to a single day if I keep up the pace. I didn't put seatbelts on this thing. If you need to come to a sudden stop, we're both flying off and dying, please lower the speed. Fine, no need to be such a baby about it, she said as she did what he asked. At the very least, she'd made plenty of distance before giving in. They could still probably manage it in one trip so long as they drove through the night. If my intense desire to live makes me a baby, then so be it. We don't all have a vitality over 1,000, you know. At least let me get a couple more levels of defense enhancement before you do that again. Come on, relax. Aren't you looking forward to getting back too? Yes. Ideally with all of my limbs attached. Again, you're being a baby. I already slowed down and everything. Just want to remind you that I already went through dying once is all. Even if it happened while I was asleep, I don't want any repeats. I'm only going twice as fast as anyone else now, it's fine. She thought she heard him muttering something about speed limits and other things she wasn't too sure of when her eyes caught something a bit farther ahead, and without warming sped up. Thera, I think someone ahead is being attacked. Just hold on. There was a carriage in the distance at a standstill with something surrounding it, and as she drew closer she was able to make out the forms a bit easier, leaving her to groan. Oh man. Don't tell me those are what I think they are? Ben asked. If you think they're more time ferrets, then I have bad news for you. Great. In that case, what do you want to do? There looked to be 10 of them surrounding the carriage, keeping it at a standstill as they repeatedly threw themselves at it head first, as well as trying to dig through the doors with their claws. They had their time magic to slow them down while speeding up their own movements, but she was pretty sure she had an idea to at least deal with a few of them. You might want to hang on to something? She warned before bringing her speed up and slamming into the 5 on her side, feeling their bodies break as the metal carriage slammed into them as Ben swore up a storm. Oh, I did not like that. Just 5 more, she said as she jumped out of the carriage, trying to get the rest before they could react. They were on the other side of the carriage, but she moved to get them in her sights, finding them frozen from the development, an opportunity she didn't let herself miss on. Using her earth magic, she raised a cloud of dirt into the air, letting go of the smaller dust to focus on the pebbles and stones, before bringing it together as if she were trying to make an earth bullet out of it, but with a level of power and speed that could only be done through a tremendous expenditure of mana as each tiny stone tore through the bodies of the beasts, leaving them dead on the ground and riddled with holes. The carnage of the attack couldn't help fill her with joy. Despite its violence, it was more evidence of her growing control to match her power, with the notification going off in her head being the icing on the cake. As disappointing as it was that she hadn't gained a level of earth magic during the job, it wasn't like the bonuses went anywhere, and after checking the occupants of the carriage to offer her healing magic if they needed it, she went to Ben to use his job crystal, admiring the options before her. Available jobs: Queen of Mana, Musician, Professional Dancer, Bard, Darkness Mage Charm Specialized, Life Mage, Healer, Telekinetic Mage, Dark Mage, Spirit Mage, Adventurer. As exciting as it was to see the adventurer job available for becoming rank 4, she was well aware it was an option she'd probably never take unless desperate. While it was disappointing that there weren't any new options besides that, it did leave her to think on what exactly to take. My only real options are Life Mage, Healer, Telekinetic Mage, or Spirit Mage. But which to go with? Healer and Life Mage are both basically the same anyway, and I really would like to get a bit better with my life magic. On the other hand, I could do more with my earth magic if I took Telekinetic Mage too. Obviously, it's one of those two that are the correct choice. I'm looking to improve my earth magic and my life magic. I should clearly pick one of them, she thought as she tried to convince herself, before heaving a sigh and giving in to her curiosity, taking Spirit Mage. Name: Thera Oris. Race: Succubus/Spirit Hybrid. Titles: Spirit Child. Jobs: Spirit Mage, LV15. Previous jobs: Beginner Dancer, Dancer, Apprentice Mage, Earth Mage, True Mage, High Earth Mage. Attributes: A Vitality, 1036. A Vitality Recovery Rate, 11 per hour.
Mana, 256,849.
Mana recovery rate, 35 per minute. Strength, 108. Agility, 364. Stamina, 303. Intelligence, 290. Affinities, a light, 4. Life 22. Fire 11. Water 14. Air 12. Earth, 103. Death 3. Dark, 43. Space 2. Time 1. Resistances, a light, 5. Life 9. Fire 11. Water, 16. Air 12. Earth, 35. Death 13. Dark, 42. Space, 7. Time 8. Blessed skills. Earth Magic LV7. Charm Magic LV2. Passive skills. World Speak Plus. Coordination LV3. A Medical Knowledge LV2. A Bind. Active skills. Calculate LV1. Dance LV4. The String Instrument LV3. A Woodwind Instrument LV2. Cleaning LV1. Staff Wielder LV0. Meditation LV2. Speed Reading LV2. Life Magic LV4. Telekinesis LV1. Dark Magic LV1. Spirit Empowering LV0. Blessings. Anilia's Blessing. Trials. Trial of Analia and Talona. Well, that's a lot to take in. Considering it was the first time any of her jobs had ever provided either levels or skills, to say that what just happened was big was an understatement. Almost a quarter of her skills had just improved all at once, and the change was enough to leave her feeling dizzy. She didn't even have it in her to feel too bad about her charm going up as well, though something must have shown to that effect as Ben took her hand. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes filled with concern. "Well, my charm went up, but I don't think I can let it bother me too much when every single affinityed magic skill I have did as well. Looks like I'm pretty compatible with the Spirit Mage job. I even got a new skill on top of it." Wow! He was as stunned as she was. Even if he'd gotten a couple levels and skills by that point, what she'd received was massive. That wasn't even considering what she hadn't mentioned, that the bonuses to those skills were described as major, a good indicator that things would be going very well for her so long as she carried it through to the end. In that case, what's the new skill? Spirit Empowering. I'm not positive, but it feels like it costs mana to use. All she had to go off of was what little instinctual knowledge came with the skill, as well as the fact it was an active skill, but that still left plenty of possibilities that needed to be explored if she was going to figure it out. Not that it was a priority. It seemed like she'd be able to level the job just fine as she used her magic like she normally did. Worst to worst, it could be ignored. From the name, maybe it's a buff skill then? Ben asked, significantly more curious since he'd be making a copy of it for his enchanting. From how it sounds, I'd think maybe one that could exclusively be used on spirits, but then what would it buff? Maybe it would make their magic more powerful since they aren't able to level it. Not sure, but I can work on figuring it out later if I see any stray spirits. For the time being, let's focus on getting the rest of the way home. At Ben's insistence, they stopped for the night to rest before getting back to town by the afternoon the following day. While she would have been happy to test the maximum speed they could go, it seemed to put him on edge, so she gave in. Once they got to town, they parked their new carriage around the back of her uncle's shop before walking home from there. Since they didn't have anywhere else to store it, that was the only real choice. But given its sheer weight from being made of solid metal, as well as the lack of places to get an animal to pull from, theft wasn't a major concern. They let themselves enjoy the walk back the best they could, though Ben's spirits were still low from the dour ending of their trip. "Want to stop for a snack?" she suggested, trying to appeal to his stomach. "It's been a while since we've been back. I wouldn't mind a taste of home. Maybe tomorrow, I don't know why, but the atmosphere feels kind of bad. Why does everyone around look so worried?" During the last few weeks he'd been cooped away, doing his best to save Inix, meaning he wasn't super aware of what was going on. She should have realized, but that meant the awkward responsibility of explaining things was falling to her. In a couple weeks we'll be seeing if the prophet gods were right with their earliest prediction for the invasion. It's not just here, the entire world is a little on edge. Still, I wouldn't worry about it too much. With a 2-decade window, what's the point of being bothered by it for the time being? Wait, what? He asked, confused. Shouldn't there be something like another year before we need to worry about that? Yeah, but for whatever reason, the invaders announced their arrival a year in advance. We'll be seeing it in a couple weeks if they'll be here in a year. So that means it's already been 2 years, huh? He said quietly as his expression took on a darker tone before he tried to force it back. Well, no point in worrying about it when nothing's happened yet. Let's just relax for the day. I could use a break. Despite the assertion that he wanted to relax, both she and her aunt could tell that something was wrong as the night went on. He lacked the spirit he usually had and snuck off to bed early while they were in the middle of a game of low mage. So what happened with Ben? Sonia asked when they were alone. It seems like something's on his mind. I don't know. He was sad about what happened with the Talos that came for his help. But then we got to talking about why everyone in town seemed worried and his mood dropped even more from there. Maybe he's worried about the invasion. She wished she was as good at reading him as he was for her, or better yet, to have a skill with mind-reading aspects to it like he did. But no such luck. All she could do was try to pull together the best guess she could. Something her aunt had far more experience with as she tapped her cheek, her eyes lighting up in understanding. Right, I suppose if it's close to the invasion prophecy, then we're also close to that. What? The anniversary of the various summoned arriving in the world, including Ben. She wanted to hit herself. Of course that would be the issue. How could she not have been able to see that herself? Not only was she well aware that he still struggled with the fact that his home was lost to him, it was the anniversary of his death. How could this be anything but a stressful time for him? She stared down at the brace on her arm, something he kept working hard on improving for her. He'd done so much to try and help her since they'd met, and it felt like she'd done so little to thank him in comparison. If he was going to be in a bad place emotionally because of it, then she wanted to help. The only question was how. I can't sleep. Want to sing me a lullaby or something then? Help put me at ease? Lame. His God said with a sigh. It's fine. It's just hard to believe how much time has passed is all. 2 years flew by. Thanks, but really don't worry. I just need to distract myself for a while. It's been a long few weeks. He looked to the container he had placed beside Frederick, the only thing ensuring Onyx's soul stayed bound to the world while he got to figure out how to rebuild his enchantments from scratch, maybe needing to make him a new body in the process. Pelania had said they would store the Talos body and Ben was pretty sure it wouldn't decay. But that didn't mean he would be able to just reattach everything if he ever became a good enough craftsman. Still, one thing to worry about at a time. The sun would be up soon and he could tell he wouldn't be getting any rest, so instead he went to the shop. Even if it wouldn't be open for customers, he could at least chip away at his training. He had an idea for leveling his current job, but that meant first ignoring his enchanting to focus on his crafting, making a variety of shields, swords, and spears before anything else, giving him plenty to practice on when focusing on his target skill. Once he got them all, he pulled out all of his skill rings and a notepad to record the results before throwing himself into his task. Starting with a spear, he began placing enchantments on it, the exact same way he'd done when he'd made his knife, only at a higher level thanks to his skills improving while at the same time adding the space enchantment his knife lacked, making it so any injury it caused would collapse around the blade to inflict more damage. It was only as he'd finished that the spearhead cracked and turned to dust in much the same way he'd expected it would. It was nothing too shocking, in fact he'd expected the result. Though his enchanting had improved since he'd made the knife, he was now working with higher level skills on top of trying to add more, all the while not doing the one thing that made his knife possible. He hadn't designed the spear to handle any specific enchantments when he'd made it. As wasteful as it was, he had his reasons for it. He wanted to see just what he could accomplish on a standard item. He thought he had a pretty good sense of roughly what he could add to something without breaking it by this point, but it was good to experiment to see if different configurations would leave him able to get away with more than he currently could. With that in mind, he grabbed his next spear, identical to the first in every way, and began applying the same enchantments, but modified the way he was doing it, basing it off of one of the items he'd seen in Analia. Instead of placing all of the enchantments on the spearhead, he began on the handle, building them up there for the most part while having tendrils extend to the head where they would display their effects. While it wouldn't be as powerful as it would if he placed all of them in that one area, the added stability would more than make up for it. At least that was the idea, but as opposed to the last one where the head shattered to dust, leaving nothing but a handle, this one left the head as the handle crumbled. Maybe that would have worked a bit better if I'd made a metal pole instead of a wooden one. Oh well, I can just fit the two leftovers together before moving on to the next option. He still had plenty of tools to make after all, and with Falk gone for a while, he had nothing to do but practice. 1 in 5. He thought to himself as he swept up the dust surrounding him. There's an edge I can get to where the tools I make will have a 1 in 5 chance of not turning to dust after I pile enchantments on them. I just need to figure out what factors are making them fail 4 times and figure out how to eliminate them. Myriad, I don't suppose you saw anything that might be the issue? But that doesn't help me now. Okay, change of pace. I'll hit the books for the rest of the day. All of the crates he'd bought were left at the shop since he couldn't fill Sonia's home with them and Falk wouldn't be there to complain for a while. So he began to dig through them, trying to figure out what he'd need. He was fairly certain the issue was with his enchanting, though he couldn't completely discount the possibility that all of the items he'd made had some common flaw that was the issue. Still, he'd get nowhere if he didn't decide where to focus, and with the combination of his high enchanter job as well as his new knowledge skill, reading through the books on those topics first would prove the most useful to him, even if they didn't help him learn anything he needed. So with that, he was content to let the hours pass, at least until he heard a knock at the door. He was going to just ignore it. The shop was closed after all, and there was a sign saying so out front, but whoever it was seemed persistent and eventually he gave in, if just to tell them to go away. That attitude completely changed as he saw Thera standing outside and gave her a big smile. Oh hey. Sorry, I thought you might have been a customer. What's up? I finished at the clinic for the day and figured I'd stop by. How about you? Just about to do some reading. Weren't you looking forward to being done with it? Or have they still not managed to hire any new healers? Well, I wasn't planning on going back, but helping Lux for a while helped convince me to at least do it on occasion. At the very least, I need to try and raise my life magics level anyway if I want to take advantage of it for my quest. And now that I'm at the 4th level, I can be useful while they train the new hires, so all in all it's not too bad. Anyway, there was something I was hoping to ask you about, if that's okay. Yeah, of course, what can I do? She seemed to hesitate a bit, as though she were unsure of herself but gathered her resolve. I know it's a bit of a waste, but do you think you could use some of your magic materials to make me a way to power the enchantments on the stove? I figured it might be nice if I started trying to cook for myself, but I still can't really use any old enchantment without risking destroying it. What is that all? Sure. Just give me a minute to figure out how to put something together. You don't need to be so hesitant, you know. Technically, they belong to both of us, so if you ever have anything you want made from them, just let me know. It was an obviously simple solution to her problem that he'd never bothered to give any thought to. He liked cooking for her and Sonia, so he hadn't felt the need to figure out a solution, but he couldn't deny the fact that it would be helpful for her and wouldn't leave her dependent on others, so he got to work. It was altogether too simple to make as well. Basically just a clamp made of mithril with an incredibly small white mana crystal embedded in it to ensure it got sufficient power. Thera had sat down and quietly watched the entire process of its creation, seemingly enjoying it as he worked, and he handed it to her when he was done. Alright, all you need to do is attach it to where we typically grab to run mana into it, and that should power the stove. The main thing you need to remember is that you need to remove it when you're done. Leaving the stove on can be a quick way to burning the house down if you aren't paying attention. Anyway, I was just going to do some reading, but want me to come give you a hand? Maybe a few pointers? Don't worry about it. I've helped you plenty of times by this point, remember? I'm sure I'll manage making myself lunch at least. Still, I think I'll leave dinner to you if you don't mind. Of course, he told her with a grin. I'll be home in a couple hours, so don't fill up too much. They said their goodbyes as she left, and Ben sat back down with his book in hand. He had plenty to read and hopefully figure out just where the issue was, so he focused on that as the hours slipped by. What the hell? Ben muttered before calling out to the ceiling, though trying to be quiet enough to not wake Thera or Sonia. Hey Myriad. Any word on enchanting knowledge, 'cause I just leveled it up. The problem is that I leveled it up while reading a book on skills, not enchanting. He'd been able to consume far more information since getting the Zeroth level of the speed reading skill, being able to read faster while remembering more, a task made all the easier with his knowledge skill to go with it, but that didn't mean he understood why it leveled up. Luckily though, it seemed Myriad had an idea on it. It wasn't the most satisfying answer, but his god was right. If the skill made it easier for him to remember information on other skills, then it would be extremely useful. It would just be added to the ever-growing list of them that he wanted a bit more knowledge on. With the day still early though, he did a bit more reading before getting up, planning to make a simple breakfast for everyone to leave while he went to the shop, only to find Sonia and Thera already up with food ready and a plate for him. "What's got you two up?" he asked, not used to seeing either of them at such an hour. "We're expecting a bad day at the clinic given how the last few went, so we're heading in early," Sonia explained, seeming exhausted as she did. "Given what day it is, we're expecting the end of the world parties to be at their worst, meaning plenty of injuries to deal with. Right, looks like it's officially been 2 years now," he thought as he tried to hide the sudden sadness that filled him. With all he'd been doing to keep himself busy, he'd managed to get the fact to slip his mind, typically not passing through any of the areas where things were getting a little crazy, so he hadn't been reminded. Thera reached beside him and squeezed his hand, giving him a comforting smile as she did while Sonia tried to give him a warning. "Maybe you shouldn't go to the shop today, Ben. I'm not sure how crazy things will end up, but it might be better to stay in." "Thanks, but I have a few things to finish up." "Don't worry. I'll do my best to be careful, and I've got a handy friend to look out for me. Actually, will you both be okay? Want me to meet you when you're done to walk you home?" If things were going to be dangerous, he didn't like the idea of them going around by themselves, but both shook their heads. "There's going to be a few guards stationed at the clinic to ensure everyone behaves themselves, and they'll be walking us back when we're done, so you don't need to worry." "But you should still be home for dinner," Thera cut in. "If things are going to be bad, you shouldn't stay out too late." "No worries. I'll be back in time to cook something for everyone." With food done, they all went off as Myriad spoke in his mind. "I just need to do something to take my mind off of things instead of being stuck in, don't worry too much. I have no freaking clue what to do," he thought, depressed as he looked at all of the materials around him. Maybe it was just his mood, but inspiration failed to strike. He'd made plenty of weapons since getting back to town, destroying most of them with his enchantments as well, but he didn't think something like that would get him in the right headspace. Myriad suggested, "Not a bad idea." The one in his projector had been made by using a hand crank to rotate a notched wheel against a variety of metal pegs to make the sounds he needed, but really there were better ways to do it utilizing magic. He just hadn't had the knowledge at the time. Now that he'd flipped through a few books on enchanting with air magic, he thought he had a decent idea, though he'd need to see if it would work in practice. The more he thought about it, the more charmed he felt. He didn't think he would be able to do anything that would cover vocals, but he should at least be able to make something that would do the tones, and it would be nice to try and recreate the melodies of the songs he liked before they all completely faded from his mind. "And I think I have a good idea for a very cool player too. Let's see, it definitely won't need it, but I'll build everything around a rainbow mana battery to be on the safe side. It should let me add a cool effect or two as I go, so there's no harm. Yeah, let's do it." He carefully planned out the enchantments before shaping the materials to fit the image he had in his mind. Even if it wouldn't strictly be singing, it would perfectly convey the feeling. Myriad, credit where credit's due, making a music player was a fantastic idea. "I can completely cross this off my list of things to make," he told his god as he walked home for the day, early enough that he could get a start on dinner. I'll have it going during dinner. Give them a taste of some poorly recreated good old-fashioned earth music. Let's see, Thera has a few musical skills. Maybe she could help me clean up the sound a little. Doing adjustments by ear is far harder than I'd expected. Even if it left him thinking of his homeworld, it had been a perfect distraction from how long he'd been gone, letting him focus more on the bits he enjoyed. It would also just be nice to have in general. While he would occasionally pass musicians on the street, he simply didn't have the same access he previously did for it. It was easy to ignore just how much he was constantly exposed to different songs on Earth, but with it gone there was a noticeable void. He reminisced for the rest of the way, trying to think about the few other melodies he could remember to try and recreate later, maybe meeting up with some of his old classmates at some point to see if they could help him as well. but quickly stopped as he opened the door, only to find the house filled with smoke. Oh crap. Did Thera leave the stove on? He ran to the kitchen, wanting to see what the damage was, only to find Thera frantically waving a towel over a burnt pan, panic on her face as she did, breathing a small sigh of relief seeing it was nothing major. He calmly walked up beside her and placed a lid on top of it before taking it off the heat. Looks like you maybe should have taken me up on some lessons after all, he joked as he patted her back, trying to show it was nothing to worry about. Are you all right? Yeah, that just went worse than I'd hoped, she told him, sounding defeated as she did. She looked far more disappointed than he would have expected for a bit of burnt food, so he did his best to cheer her up. Well, it can happen to anyone when they first start, so don't worry too much. I was coming home to make dinner anyway. Give me a minute and we can throw something together. Wait, she told him, grabbing his hand as he went to grab ingredients. Let me do it. You sure? Didn't you ask me to come back in time to make dinner? I wanted you home in time for dinner, not to make it. I wanted to try and surprise you by cooking something, she admitted awkwardly, golden blush painting her face. He didn't know what to say. He was too caught off guard and she rushed to explain herself. It's just, you've done a lot for me and I know you aren't feeling great right now because of, well, So me and Auntie wanted to throw a little party, but she's stuck at work and Uncle still hasn't gotten back and things haven't really worked out how I'd hoped, but I still want to cook you something. He squeezed her hand, a small smile spreading on his lips. Thanks. I'm sorry I made you worry, but really I'm fine. I've just been a little out of sorts knowing that 2 years have already gone by is all. But you don't need to do anything. I'm happy just to spend time with you like usual. I told you, I'm not doing this just to make you feel better. Well, I mean that's a part of it, but you've made me a staff and you're working so hard on the brace and you're my best friend. It feels like you've done so much for me. I just want to do something to thank you. You do plenty just by being in my life. But if you're sure, then I won't say no to trying your cooking. She didn't meet his eyes, feeling embarrassed about being so open, so upfront about caring, instead going around the kitchen to grab what she needed and began to try again while talking about the day. Did you have any problem getting home? Things were crazy at the clinic, too many people drinking too much and being general idiots. I think I may have treated more broken bones and alcohol poisoning than I ever have before. Ha, that sounds wild. My day was far nicer in comparison. Falk has the shop pretty well soundproof to keep the noise from smithing getting out and annoying anyone, but it looks like it works pretty well for the opposite too. It was definitely more noticeable when I went out though. Ugh, I just don't get the reaction. There could literally be years to go. What's the point of getting yourself killed now? Sometimes you just need a distraction, he said with a shrug. I can't exactly say I get it, but at the same time I didn't grow up hearing about hundreds of worlds being conquered, so I can't really judge. Even now it feels a bit unbelievable. He couldn't deny the reality of the situation, but he also couldn't help but feel a distance from it. He hadn't spent his whole life fearing the day it would come, and he hadn't been training to deal with it like so many of the other summoned. Even if he knew the threat, there was a comfortable emotional distance. They moved on to lighter topics as she cooked until the food was ready and sat down to enjoy it. Ben dug in with gusto, happy to have the meal, all the more so since it was made specifically to help his mood. But Thera only poked at it, seeming even more depressed than after the first attempt. Sorry it's not great, she told him, wishing she'd done better. I'd been practicing a bit, and I thought with all the times I'd already helped you I'd be able to get the cooking skill easily enough. But that didn't work out. It's good. Don't worry so much, he told her as he ate. Still, if it is something you want to get better at, I'll help you out. It just takes some practice. Well, maybe that would be nice. For now, is there anything you want to do next? Our plans kind of went out the window, but there's still a bit of day left. Yeah, I can think of something. And it looks like I lose again, he said as he laid down his cards while Thera leaned against him on the couch. This is the same thing we do every day, she complained as she won another game. Wasn't there anything else you'd rather do? I mean, it's late and I don't really want to get caught up in anyone's partying. Pretty sure everything in town is closed by now anyway, so it doesn't leave many options, he told her with a shrug before his eyes lit up. Actually, Give me a minute, you can help me out with something. He never did use his music player during dinner, being too caught off guard by everything when he'd gotten home, but now was a good enough time for it as any, so he took it out of his bag. It looked like a simple cylinder with two thin wings coming out of the side, but since he'd designed it with a very specific idea in mind, it was exactly how he needed it. Removing the cap from the back, he took out a variety of smaller tubes from his bag, trying to decide which one to go with before settling on something slower and calm. It was late, so he wasn't in the mood for anything too energetic, so he slid it in the back of the player, inserting a Rainbow Mana battery with it after and giving it a gentle toss into the air. The melody began as the other two enchantments he placed activated, causing it to gently fly in a circle over their heads, thanks to an air spell, while an illusion of a glowing blue bird covered the tool, creating the impression it was flying. He looked at it, not feeling as satisfied as he would have liked. The illusion was stiff and felt lifeless, and it was obvious the sound quality needed some work, but at the very least it was all right as a first attempt. Thera, though, seemed transfixed. It's so pretty. How are you getting it to sing? The inner tube contains the air spell with a song on it, while the outer one helps amplify it while holding the enchantments for the illusion and making it float. It was a fun little project. He'd originally pulled it out to get her thoughts, as well as see if she could think on how to improve the song. But with it up there, he decided to tease her a little and held out his hand. Would my lovely fiancé care to dance? He'd expected her to complain, as she always did when he called her that, but instead she took his hand and got up. Sure. I guess this is at least something different. Did you mean real dancing, or what your race calls dancing? Hey now, plenty of humans can dance really well. I'm just not one of them. So not real dancing, got it? She placed her hands on his shoulders while looking up at him. You know, I could teach you how to actually do it sometime, especially if you're going to teach me how to cook. We'll place that as a maybe for the time being. Well, if you're ever feeling up to it, let me know. I wouldn't say no to a dance partner, she told him with a smile as she made him spin her, managing to completely have the lead as they went. The time passed as they spoke and enjoyed the moment, until Thera had to ask the question that only grew on her mind. So does the song not end? Oh, well, normally it does, but since I could only figure out how to get a single one on a tube, I made it so they all loop instead of having to change it every time. Makes it kind of hard to know when to stop, though. We can finish now if you want, he told her, gently pulling away, only for her to hold on tighter. Just one more minute, she told him, seeming to grapple with something before gently leaning up, leaving him feeling the gentle touch of lips on his cheek, before slowly pulling away, looking shy as she did. I know you have some complicated feelings about being here, but even still I just want you to know I'm glad I have you in my life. Not meeting his eyes as her face twinkled in the light of his flying music box, she gave a small smile. Anyway, it's getting late, so I should get to sleep. Have a good night, Ben. Sleep well, Thera, he told her as she ran away, and he went to his room, not realizing he was holding his cheek till he went to lie down. Hey Myriad, are you there? I think I might really like Thera. How many times do I have to tell you? Not happening. Ben could only groan. When he'd made the mistake of admitting to both his god and himself that he was interested in Thera those few months prior, it had been in a moment of weakness when he was unsure about what to do about it, and because of that Myriad hadn't shut up since. Look, maybe she does like me. I'll admit that's kind of the impression I get when I practice connecting with her anyway. But that's meaningless if she doesn't want to get romantically involved with anyone regardless. Now, are we going to keep talking about this, or can I focus on the church? It was finally complete in all of its glory. 2 stories with 2 basements as well. He had a lot of space to fill up for his own uses, but the main area left for visitors of all sorts was what he was currently dedicated to, filling the walls with small metal plates. It had been his idea, and he thought it was quite the good one, filling the walls with tiles, each of which had a skill enchanted to it with its name and level written down. It created an environment where Myriad's believers would want to come to make copies of them, and was a place where the effects of Connect could be fully felt. With that goal clear, the day had been spent copying the effects of his numerous skill rings, but despite that, his god wasn't budging. Make it a quest and I'll think about it. I'm sure Sakhel can handle that. For now, let me just finish up in peace. With only a little more nagging from his god, he was able to finish up with the enchantments before moving on to the next part of setting up the church, the private areas. He fully intended to use almost all of the extra space for his own purposes, and given the hundreds of books he now had, he needed to put together shelves before arranging everything. As far as things went, it was a surprisingly quick task. He already had his wood cut and ready, it just came down to assembly, only taking a bit over an hour to do. From there, he arranged the shelves before looking them all over in the end. Yep, it's perfect. What do you think, Myriad? Yeah, but now I can start moving things I don't need in here as well. Trust me, it'll fill up before you know it. Hey now, I did it because it was convenient. If you were against it, I would have just made the entire place smaller. Hey, no patiently waiting for my inevitable demise. Once done with the church, happy to finally have it in the state he wanted. He went home for the day, walking into the smell of food filling the room as he went to the kitchen and finding Thera standing over a pan, hair tied back as she focused on her cooking, only looking away from it to greet him with a smile. Hey, how was the day? She asked him warmly, piercing his heart as he tried to keep anything from showing on his face. Since she'd gained the Zeroth level of cooking, walking into a domestic scene like that had become all the more common, though he still tended to do most of it himself, and each time it made him flash back to the first meal she tried making for him. Yeah, it went well. I'm all done with it for now. How about you? Just practiced spirit empowering. It hadn't taken long for her to learn just what the skill was good for. Unlike great spirits, regular spirits took much longer to regain any mana spent, at a speed comparable to mortals. Thera's skill she'd gained after taking the spirit mage job let her bypass that by sharing her mana with them, though there was some loss along the way, so she'd taken to devoting a bit of practice to it when she was able to find any spirits passing through who were willing to help. No spirits in town today, so no, just helped at the clinic and did a bit of my earth magic. Anyway, since you're here before it's ready, what do you think? Anything I can do to improve it? He poked his head over her shoulder to see what she was making and found a dish native to Analia. Diced meat in a thick purple sauce that he took a spoonful of to taste. It's good. Maybe take it off the heat for a bit and add some ground anise to season it, like half a spoonful. But you're really getting the hang of this. You probably don't need me to cook for you at all anymore. He joked as he smiled while she gave him a gentle nudge with her elbow. I'd much rather eat your cooking than do it myself, so don't go quitting on me yet. I'd miss your food. She told him with a small laugh before realizing she might have said something embarrassing, and a gentle golden blush touched her face, all but captivating him. Why are you the one dreaming about it? And for the millionth time, not going to. Now ease up before I tear down the church. It's been a while since I've gotten any sacrilege levels after all. Look, this is something I need to figure out myself. Do you think you could just let it be while I work on it? With that bit of peace returned to him, he focused back on Thera, content to spend the time chatting and cooking together. All right, boy, we have some time, so work on whatever suits you. Falk told him once all the main shop work was done. Ben had already replaced all of the stock he needed to and spent some time cleaning up, meaning he could move on to devoting himself to his self-improvement, namely through leveling his job. Of course, he wasn't just focusing on his enchanting. After all, he made all of the items he'd enchant himself, so he was able to get plenty of practice for that as well. But after he'd made his flying music player, it inspired him to get a bit more creative. And with that in mind, he'd taken to doing some slightly more unusual projects on top of his usual weapons. Today, he'd decided he'd be making something unlike anything he'd seen in the world prior. A floating plant display. The idea was simple enough, even if it would look a bit unusual. All he had to do was create a base with an earth magic enchantment on it designed to suspend a ball of dirt in the air, with the additional effect of giving it a slow rotation as it did. Once that was done, he ran out to get not only his ball of earth but also the flower that would be planted in it. He'd selected one with large blue petals he thought looked appealing and then put everything together, watching it float in the air once it was complete. It ended up being far easier to create than he'd hoped, so to add to it, as well as reduce the amount of care he would need to put towards it, he attached a pole to the base before creating both a light, water, and low plant magic enchantment to it, letting it illuminate the flower and aid in its growth, as well as collect water to sprinkle down on it once a day. He'd adjust the variables over the weeks to try and figure out what worked best for keeping the plant healthy, but he was satisfied with the final result. What do you think, Falk? Pretty nice, right? It is. Shame we can't sell something like it, but not many could afford the mana crystal to power it. Still, when you're done being my apprentice, you really should consider working for Pelania. Even if she's a handful, she'd be able to keep you supplied with all the materials you could hope for while giving you enough leeway to be creative. Ah, that's a while off, so I'm not going to worry about it too much for now. Besides, I could probably have a fair bit more freedom by just stopping in occasionally to make her things to earn a little extra while living off my patents. No need to tie myself down to someone. True enough, I suppose we'll sit down and talk about your options when that's a little closer. For now, what are you going to do with the rest of the day? Anything you need help with? MMH, maybe if you have the time. I'm still working on designing some hypothetical enchantments for soul sealing, but since it depends on using levels of magic just a little outside of my grasp, I'm not too sure about it. Mind giving it a look? All right. It's not like we're busy, so show me your notes. He pulled a stack of papers out of his bag and handed them to Falk, watching the Yeti pore over them as he thought about the project. Myriad's advice on the matter was proving invaluable, but he had to change enough that he needed a second opinion on it. After all, sealing it was really only the first part. His two main goals for attempting something like that was to allow Onyx to use his body again, though that would require a high level of improvement to his enchanting as well, on top of what had originally given him the target, attempting to use it with a beast form skill on an item. Of the two, the original goal would be much easier, even if it was far outside of what was possible for him at the moment, but both goals had the same underlying implication. He couldn't just seal away a soul forever. He needed to give it away it could still be interacted with after, which added a whole other level of difficulty to the task. Well, at worst I can collect a few demon souls and then figure out how to use them after. Which is why I'm only going to do it with demons, so don't worry. Besides, I probably won't go out of my way to actually collect any until I think I've got it, unless a good opportunity comes up, of course. Hate to say it, boy, but I'm probably not going to be much help with this, Falk told him, unknowingly interrupting his talk with his god. This is pretty far outside of my specialty. I'll take some time to think on it and write down any ideas I have for you, but not sure if it will be any help. That's already plenty, thanks, Falk. Bah, don't worry about it. Have you thought about what you'll be trying to seal them in when you make the attempt? Oh yeah, that should be the easy part. It had to be a weapon. There was no real way to collect a creature's soul while letting it live after all, and by making something like a knife that would handle the job of absorbing it, it wouldn't be too bad that just left what he would be absorbing it into. From what he'd learned of his god's structure, Myriad had been made of a variety of magic materials to make him possible, and Ben intended to do the same, though there was really only one he needed to use for his goal, a rainbow mana crystal. While the material had not only boundless space for something like mana, it could also be altered to hold other non-corporeal things. Doing so would ruin its ability to absorb mana, at least for as long as it housed a soul, but that wasn't an issue as far as he was concerned. And if I build it in such a way that I can change out the crystals, I'll be able to easily take advantage of a group of potential materials. I mean targets. The battery design already works well, so I might as well stick with it for this too. That way I know I'll have some on hand if need be. Other than that, actually, is there any reason I couldn't prepare the knife ahead of time? This really more depends on the quality of the enchantment than the item after all. The more he thought about it, the better an idea it felt, all the more so for the fact that he'd already created one that mostly fit the qualifications. His first knife was designed in such a way that it would be able to tolerate enchantments of every affinity but space. He'd just have to create something along the same line while making sure to cover that aspect as well. The sealing enchantment he was attempting to make would pull from all affinities, but at the level he thought he'd be when he'd attempt it, there'd likely be no risk of destroying it, so he got started. Heating steel and grinding bones, it was a path he was long used to by this point as he lost himself to the work, blending the metal with the delicate powders to try and keep the heat from damaging them too much and costing them their properties as it did before moving on to shaping it, creating a short but sturdy blade. After a round of sharpening, giving it the thinnest edge it could comfortably hold, he looked over his new tool, smiling at the quality of his work. Until he got to the point that he'd be able to place the enchantments, he couldn't be positive that it was of a high enough quality. But he felt confident as he created a sheath and stored it away in his bag. Having finished with that, he tried to decide what would come next. There was always something to make, but he wanted to design the most complex enchantment he could. At least that was the goal until an unexpected guest walked through the shop door. "Ankh, what brings you here?" He called out cheerfully, giving them a wave which they returned in kind, though giving off an apologetic feeling as they did, even without a face to show it. "Hello, Ben. I'm sorry to bother you like this while you're working, but there's a bit of an issue and I need you to come to the guild with me." He immediately felt himself tense up as Fox stood to the side, looking curious as well. "Why, what's going on?" "There's been a call for an emergency quest. As a rank 4 adventurer, you'll need to participate, so you need to be briefed on what's happening." He felt himself deflate as his teacher chuckled. He knew this was possible ever since he first ranked up, but had all but dismissed it from his mind. To be called for it now was nothing but a pain. "Poor luck, boy. If you're being briefed, then that means you'll need a couple weeks to do it instead of handling it immediately. Looks like I'll get a bit of peace and quiet." "Actually, Fox, Cecily was adamant about making sure you showed up as well," they said, continuing their apologetic tone. "What? I haven't been an active adventurer for well over a decade. Why am I being dragged into this when I have a business to run?" "Ah, she told me to tell you, and please bear in mind that these are her words, that if you have some sort of problem with it, you should have made sure to officially quit before it became an issue." As his teacher grumbled, Ben gave him a wide grin. "Looks like you get to enjoy my company for a couple weeks then." They were led to a back room of the guild and found Thera already seated and waiting, positively vibrating with excitement as she looked at them while taking seats of their own. "Can you believe it?" she asked as she grabbed Ben's arm. "Not only do we get to do an emergency quest, but it's one with a rank limit of 4. What do you think we'll have to do? Probably something that people without combat skills like me should stay far away from," he told her dryly. "Oh, don't be like that. Don't you have 3 combat skills now?" "At level 0. And I'm pretty positive marksmanship does nothing but improve my aim a little." It had been exciting when he got it, but the only change was that he was a bit better at hitting targets and his eyesight had improved slightly, nothing major. He was still no good with his gun. It had just become a little easier to use effectively. "You'll be fine. Depending on what the quest is, they might actually want you here for your skills as a craftsman anyway. Being able to properly maintain and repair weapons is pretty important after all, and worst to worst I'll protect you," she told him, giving him a friendly nudge. "Actually, I'm more surprised to see you here, Uncle. I'm just here to suffer for not bothering to properly quit once I decided to move on to permanently focusing on my smithing, and I doubt Cecily will put up with me giving my resignation now. I'll just suck it up and help out a little." "Speaking of actually, Sonia didn't come with you?" Ben asked her. "Weren't you both at the clinic today?" One of the few things he knew about Fox's past was the fact that he used to adventure with both Sonia and Pelenia. With the one there, he would have expected to see the other as well, though Thera was quick to correct him of that assumption. Auntie made sure to properly resign when she switched to clinic work, so they couldn't ask her to come. "It's a shame, though. It would have been fun to have her join us." "Why does it seem like you're treating this like it's going to be a trip?" "I mean, at least for there and back it will be. Since we don't know what we're dealing with at our destination, it's a little harder to say." "Love the optimism. Anyway, how many more people do you think will arrive?" he asked as he looked around. Other than them, there was a group of 3 he recognized, namely Sakhel and her party, as well as another 3 he'd seen around but never spoken to, all appearing to be a hybrid species of cyclops and some sort of bird people, with one large jewel-like eye and beautiful red feathers. If it wasn't for the taboo around using materials from sentient races, he would have asked about buying some for their look alone, but assumed that even without the ethical concerns they might not want to be approached about such things. He was sure there'd be more coming, but Thera surprised him with her answer. "This might be everyone. Maybe a couple more since they haven't started yet." "What? How are there so few?" "There's always plenty of people in the guild when we come for our quests. The majority of people get stuck at rank 5. One of the reasons we've both been able to rank up to 4 so easily is probably because we both have demons recorded on our cards. It shows a certain level of competence, even if we aren't full-time adventurers like the others here," she explained. "Rank 3 is even harder to get. I'm pretty sure the only person in town at that rank would be the guild master, though we'll be well on our way to getting there depending on what the quest is and how much we contribute. Huh, I would have thought the guild master would be ranked a lot higher than that honestly. It's how the rankings work, from 7 to 3 it's all about accomplishment. But for rank 2 you need to have at least one awakened skill, and at rank 1 you either need multiple or else an awakened skill at level 5. Not awakened a second time? He asked curiously. Anyone who's done that isn't moved by nations, they can move nations, she explained. I'm not sure how many of them there currently are since supposedly some people don't publicly admit to it, but there should be less than 10 who've managed it in the world. They'd have no reason to work for the guild. Huh, neat. In that case, if I awaken my crafting, would I be forced into becoming a rank 2 adventurer? Like, it's not a combat skill. Wouldn't it just be cruel to force me to deal with rank 2 quests? I'm not sure actually, she said after a moment's thought. That's probably a question for the guild staff. Okay then, and Falk, what rank are you? He asked his teacher, not hiding any of the curiosity in his eyes. Rank 4. Why does that feel like a lie? Because you're too distrusting. He was going to push the question more, but Cecily walked in, along with a group of 4 he hadn't seen before that took the last table. He felt something in Thera's demeanor change but decided to save questioning it for after. Once there, she started handing out a small booklet for everyone as she greeted them, which Ben immediately began reading through, before getting to the heart of why they were all called for. All right, sorry to grab you all on such short notice, but we've been requested to assist with an emergency quest. The aquatic races are dealing with the movement of the Leviathans as they're changing their migration route, and if they and the prophecies of the Banshee are to be believed, there's going to be widespread death and destruction if not dealt with. Now Ben, she said, calling him out in particular. Since this is pretty important, do you think you could pay attention? The books to read through when this is done. Don't worry, I have so many mind skills, even if it doesn't look like I'm listening, I'm probably paying more attention than anyone else in the room. But while I have you, here's a question. The book says Leviathan breath fire. That's right. Okay, why do they breathe fire? They're freaking sea monsters. Mostly sea monsters, but part of their migration brings them onto land. This wasn't an issue when it was in the untamed lands, but a group's gone far off course. Unless something changes, they'll be dangerously close to some populated areas, so they need to be dealt with before anything happens. Unfortunately, given the unreliable nature of mortal prophecy and the whims of wildlife, we can't be sure when they'll arrive, so we'll leave tomorrow. It should take 10 days to get there, so make sure you're all ready to leave bright and early in the morning. For all we know, we might need to fight as soon as we get there. If we need to get there as quick as we can, then I can get us there faster, Thera called out excitedly, drawing all eyes to her and making Ben's stomach sink. I won't object if that really is the case, but how will you manage that? I can't give full approval without more information. I have a cart I can move with my earth magic. Last time me and Ben came back from the gate, it only took 2 days, and I'm sure I can cut that down so long as the roads aren't too busy. Cecily cast her eyes to Ben, looking for confirmation, which he gave despite his misgivings. She can, though for everyone's safety I really don't recommend she go any faster than what she's already done. I'll probably also have to modify the cart to make it more suitable for carrying more passengers, since it wasn't originally set up to deal with large groups. Also, it won't be able to deal with being off-road, so if that's an issue then it won't work. Our destination is a seaside town, so we won't be going off-road until we get there, so it should be fine. In that case, if we can cut our travel time down from 10 days to 4, then it's approved. So long as you get us there, we'll add the money that would have been spent on the cart to your reward, Thera. With how she was cloaked, nobody but Ben and Falk could tell, but she was silently cheering the result. Since time was of the essence, any that could be saved was valuable, and by helping out like that she'd already ensured her contribution to the quest. Any achievement she had after that would only help her on her way to eventually becoming a rank 3 adventurer. Then, instead of leaving tomorrow morning, could we delay till the next day? Asked one of the party Cecily led in, a being that looked like a skeleton wrapped in a layer of clear slime, towering above the rest of them at almost 3 meters. It would give us more time to arrange things and prepare. All right, Cecily agreed after a moment's thought. That would still have us getting there 5 days in advance of when they expect us. If the prophecy is that far off, then there's not much we'll be able to do anyway. We'll meet here the following morning. I'll explain a bit more on the way then, so for now let's split into 2 groups, and then you can read through the booklets provided in your own time. He saw Sakhel look at them and wave, clearly indicating a desire for their groups to join together. But Cecily crushed those dreams before any words were spoken between them. If any of you have the adventurer job, raise your hand now. Of the 13 in the room, 2 of them raised their hands, one of the half-cyclops, as well as the skeleton slime who'd spoken up before. All right, this works out great. Your team will be working with Satchel's party while Zeit and the rest of you will work with Thera and Ben. Falk, you're with me. Make sure to invite them properly so everyone can gain some experience from this, and then you can all go off to do whatever you need to. Be back here in 2 days and don't be late. As Falk went to talk to Cecily, the group he'd been asked to work with began to approach them, making Thera shrink into her seat as they did. But before he could ask what was wrong, they were called out to by the friendly voice of the skeleton slime. Hey there! Fancy meeting you again. Glad to see you managed to survive. It was clear he was being spoken to, but he had no clue what they were talking about. Aside from the speaker who appeared to be a mage, the other 3 were a female hobgoblin wielding a large battle axe, a cat sith with a mace, and what looked like a frogman with a bow strapped to his back. Ben had long grown used to the large variety of unusual races and mixed-breed groups to exist in the world, but he would have thought a party looking like that would have stood out to him more, especially as he looked at their weapons. How the hell do they even function as adventurers with stuff that low quality? He couldn't help but think. Except for the bow, I could have made the staff at my first crafting level easily, not to mention the fact that the axe head and mace both look like they were made with molds instead of being properly forged. Are we going to be okay working with them? He couldn't help but worry and turned to Thera, who was doing her best to give an awkward greeting. Hello again. I didn't get the chance to say it last time, but I'm so sorry about everything that happened. Don't worry about it. We probably would have done the same in your shoes. The hobgoblin told her cheerfully. Just glad we could help. Anyway, I'm Uzi since we haven't been properly introduced. This here is Zeit, Nobu, and E.G., she said, talking about the slime person, the catsith, and the frogman respectively. Look forward to working with you. Likewise, Thera told them, still not seeming comfortable and leaving Ben to subtly try and figure out just what was the issue. So how do you all know each other anyway? He asked as cheerfully as he could. The atmosphere didn't make it seem like they'd harassed her in the past, but that left him nothing to work with as the frogman E.G. croaked out a small laugh. I guess you wouldn't remember at all given the shape you were in at the time. It must have been, a year and some ago we helped drag your corpse back to town. Clearly not a corpse since he's here before us, Zeit said. Though we are happy to see you doing well. Once our minds cleared, we had to leave town since we usually cover ensuring the roads are safe. It's lucky you caught us while we were off. That little bit of extra information made it all click in his head. Despite the far too common occurrence that was him almost dying, there was only one time a group he didn't know had helped. Back when he had been attacked by Ronzalsir, Thera had used her charm to make a group of nearby adventurers help drag him back and saved his life, and it looked like he was now standing in front of them. He'd never been able to thank them after. When talking to the guild, it seemed that they were a group that constantly split their time between Stonewall and all of the towns towards the gate to ensure the woods were safe, meaning that they never stuck in one place long, and after enough time passed the fact had slowly drifted from his mind. Now that they were all in front of him, though, he was quick to make that right. Oh, thanks so much for the save back then. I really appreciate it. Thera's awkwardness instantly made a lot more sense given that she'd charmed them all when she got them to help, but they seemed to brush it off easily enough. Don't worry about it, Uzi told him. Adventurers need to look out for each other after all. For now, let's focus on the emergency quest. Is this the first one for both of you? They gave a nod and she went on. Thought so. The reason Cecily paired us up like this was so you could join our party for the time being. It's a good way to gain job experience. Zeit, you mind? He gave a nod, and without a word a notification popped up in Ben's head. Yes, he said as the unfamiliar system prompt rang out in his head, while Thera gave a far more confident agreement. He wasn't completely sure about what change took place, but something felt subtly different within him as he agreed. It wasn't like when he connected to someone, but it created a feeling of being joined to something else he couldn't quite put into words. Excellent, Uzi continued. While we'll be working with everyone in the guild, the point of creating groups like this is to watch each other's back when it gets time to actually fight and use the chance to grow together. So long as we all work together and keep each other safe, then that's what matters. I'm not sure how much help I'll actually be with any of that, Ben awkwardly said. I'm not a fighter at all. I'm actually just a craftsman. So do you rely on magic then? Nope, no magic skills. Well, I have enchanting, but it doesn't really do much in the middle of a fight. You made it to rank 4 without any combat skills? The hobgoblin asked with a raise of her eyebrows. Technically, I have a couple at the Zeroth level, but they're only to help with my tool handling for crafting. They aren't really any good in a fight. Sorry, but I'm probably not going to be much help during all of this. You wouldn't have been able to climb the ranks if you couldn't help, so don't worry about it. Worst to worst, you'll be able to grab some free experience. Anyway, I'm sure you can already see. But our team is made up of an axe user, a mace user, bow user, as well as our goopy mage over there who has both light and fire magic. If you're mainly a craftsman, then mind if I ask about you? She questioned Thera. No, not at all. I'm a mage, as I'm sure you can tell. I mostly use earth and life magic, though I have access to telekinesis and dark magic as well. I prefer to avoid using dark magic if it can be helped, though. It takes a while for me to use and can have some negative consequences for me if I do too much. In that case, no need to worry about it, she told her. It's just nice to have such a versatile mage around if we need it. Between you and Zeit, we have pretty good coverage. Hey, so on a slightly different note, mind if I ask about your weapons? Ben questioned, no longer able to contain his curiosity. No offense or anything, but they're, well, except for the bow, they're complete garbage. He didn't want to be rude, but he also couldn't beat around the bush when he saw them. The fact that the lot of them had made it to rank 4 using tools like that was a wonder in itself. It was E.G. who broke into his croaking laughter as the rest of his party mumbled at the question. Ha, you don't mince words, huh? Sad to say, my dear teammates have an issue that keeps them from getting anything but the cheapest of weapons. Oh crap, sorry. I didn't really think about it when I spoke. Of course you guys have personal issues if you're using stuff like that, he said, bowing his head and quickly apologizing. There were all sorts of reasons people would be low on funds in the world, but it only made E.G. laugh louder. You're not wrong, but unlike any of the very good reasons somebody could use, these bunch are a bunch of gambling addicts. Any money they make gets lost on dice or whatever catches their fancy quick, so no need to apologize to them. If anything, shame them more. His guilt vanished in an instant and turned into a long sigh instead as he pinched the bridge of his nose. If they gambled away too much of their money to be able to afford proper weapons, then that was none of his business, but they had helped save his life in the past and they'd be working together for their emergency quest. It was in his best interest for them to have better quality items. Okay, I've decided. You lot come with me to the shop. I'm going to make you some proper tools to use. After a bit more discussion on the matter, namely the fact that he wouldn't be charging them, they all happily followed him back, willing to accept the items as a late thanks for saving his life. Luckily for him, they were all willing enough to share the skills they possessed with him, so he could design the enchantment he would put on them to the best of his abilities before he got to work on putting everything together. To begin with, he started on the staff for Zeit, as the other metals he'd be using were heated up. Given the hundreds he'd made for Thera by that point, it was easy enough to make one quickly after selecting the metals to use and adding the most appropriate monster materials to enhance it with. It was done before he knew it and he put it to the side. From there things got slightly more interesting for him and he moved on to creating something for the bowman E.G. From what he could see, he had the only weapon that didn't need to be replaced with something that would actually be functional, but he also couldn't just make him nothing. He'd helped save his life as much as the rest of them, so why should he be punished for being the only one with a bit of responsibility? Rather than remake his bow though, he made a quiver instead, making sure to tie in a space affinity enchantment to let it hold significantly more arrows than a normal one ever would be able to. Without having added any magic materials to it, it would need to have mana supplied to it regularly, but that was a minor issue of upkeep. He also thought about adding enchantments to any arrows he had with him, but decided it could wait. There was really no rush to it after all, it was something he could do on the ride there to pass the time. That just left the weapons. Working in the shop, he had plenty of experience making both battle axes and maces, but he didn't want to just make the usual, he wanted to create something better. Starting with the mace, he made it as he normally would, creating a sturdy metal pole with a large round head at the top, violent spikes protruding from it to give a threatening aura before leaving it there. The improvements would come from the enchantments, but there was still the axe to make as well. That he needed to give some structural changes as he constructed it to let it fully utilize the enchantments he had in mind for it, so he got to work, shaping the blade and sharpening it to the point that he was sure any creatures in the woods would be easily taken down by it while the back end was flattened. 3 deep tunnels carved into it to make use of a property he wanted it to have later. Once he was happy with it, he got to work shaping the enchantments, adding a variety to strengthen it as he normally would while at the same time using the blood-thinning skill he got from Mercy, as well as a few others he thought could enhance it to the blade. Once that was done, he focused on the tunnels in the back he'd created, making an enchantment with both fire and air spells to create small explosions within while at the same time tying in a time spell to speed up their effects. The idea was that once activated, it would create a significant amount of force that would instantly add more penetrating power to whatever it was digging into, with the only drawback being that since he didn't add any magic materials to it, it would need to be loaded with mana ahead of time and it would be hard to recharge during a fight if the wielder didn't have a large mana pool. Still, even one use could be enough to turn the tides of a battle, and he hoped it would work out how he envisioned as he put it to the side to focus on the mace. Even without any enchantments, it was leagues above what Nobu had been using, but he had an idea he was excited to test out. He placed all of his usual enchantments to strengthen the item, but on top of that he added one more, a barrier enchantment unlike any he'd done before. Now that he could enchant with it at the 6th level, the amount he could do with it had greatly increased. Barriers could be made almost invisible, but since that would raise the cost and lower the performance, he didn't bother with that at all, instead focusing on something completely different. How he shaped the barrier. Covering the mace head, he made it so that once activated, spikes of mana would extend from those already present on the mace. They wouldn't become long enough to hit the wielder, but especially if it activated at the same time as the point of contact, it could do a significant amount of damage. Combined with the other enchantments he blended into it, the mana cost wasn't low. The only reason he was comfortable making it for the weapon was that the Katsitha's mana was naturally high, meaning they'd be able to get multiple uses out of it without issue. Once done, he looked down at all he created, feeling proud of his work, but decided to add one last thing to each of them, more complicated than any of the others and something he'd only be able to do thanks to his reading in Analia. One by one, he added the final enchantments before handing each over and explaining what they do in detail. As the party of 4's eyes gleamed, they began testing them out, seeming thrilled with the result as they swung them around and were quick to give their thanks, happily taking the items. Still, stuff this good is going to be worth a pretty penny, Uzi said with a laugh. We'll have to make sure not to gamble them away. Oh, it would be illegal if you did, Ben said, confusing them as he laughed back. That would be distributing cursed items. What? Zeit said as the cheer instantly died away, leaving Ben to explain himself. They've all got a curse enchanted to them of the death and dark affinities. If anyone but you all bother to use them, they'll suffer from pain and illness. Just try holding each other's if you don't believe it, he explained, watching them hand each over briefly before handing them back upon feeling the effects. Not that I think any of you would consider selling them for gambling money or something. These are anti-theft measures, of course. Oh, yeah, of course, the skeleton slime said as the rest of his party looked to one another, wondering just what sort of person they'd been told to party with. I seriously can't believe you're both going off to fight a herd of leviathans. Can't you just, I don't know, pretend to be ill or something? Myriad said with a sigh, not even having the energy needed to keep his cubic form floating in the air, instead sitting on the ground as Ben leaned against him. I live with 2 life mages, that would never fly. Besides, if Falk can't get out of it, then there's no way I could. And I'm a life mage too, Sakhel said, being brought to Myriad's realm as an equally important member of the faith at risk of dying. But this could be a good chance to earn some recognition for you. We should do everything we can to make the most of it. While she was enthusiastic about it, Ben was not. He'd read through the booklet provided, and it was more than enough to put him on edge. They were expecting around a dozen juvenile leviathans, each the size of a house and capable of untold destruction. Maybe the others would be able to do something, but he would basically just be going to get in the way and steal some of the experience. Frankly, the insistence he participate was nothing but a pain considering the risk. He could only hope he'd be able to hang to the back as everything happened to keep himself safe, maybe focus on maintaining the others' weapons at most. It's just not worth the risk is the issue, Myriad went on. The prophecy came from the Banshee, but they can't predict anything specific, just coming deaths. That already puts this at a bad sign. At the very least, promise me you'll both keep yourselves safe. Promise. Obviously, I'm not getting eaten by a sea dragon if I can help it. The bigger concern is how it would cook you first, but as long as you keep yourselves safe, that's all that matters, though there's another thing I need you both to be aware of. It didn't make it into your booklet, but the town you're heading to is home of one of the demigods, so be on your best behavior. Despite the fact that he said it as if addressing them both, Myriad and Ben both knew who he was specifically talking about, even if Sakhel viewed him positively enough to not even consider that he might cause any problems. Not like I intend to anyway. Honestly, Myriad, just what do you think of your sweet apostle over here? Despite hearing the thought, the god didn't answer, instead focusing on Sakhel as she spoke up. Wait, why wouldn't that have been in the briefing? That seems pretty important to know. I can't say for sure, but you'll all become aware when you get to town anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. Either way, I'd recommend avoiding them if you can. It would save a lot of hassle. What? Ben couldn't help but question. Demigod implies a fair bit of power, right? I think that's exactly who I want to stick to. He knew next to nothing about beings like that on the world. But if the child of a god wasn't even strong, then what was the point? In a situation like this, that seemed like the exact sort of person to rely on. It's complicated. While he should have a decent level of strength to him, the mortal children of gods can be difficult. It's one of the reasons there's so few of them. While I can't say anything for sure since I haven't looked into him too much, keeping a distance is the easiest way to avoid issues. More importantly, though, it's to keep anyone from causing trouble, he explained, again directing his tone to Ben. What the hell, man? This is starting to feel like slander. Just trying to make things clear. Anyway, that was the main thing for the day, so try to rest on the way there and be safe. With that, Sakhel vanished, leaving Ben alone with his god. Something you wanted to keep private? It's more out of consideration to you. I just thought I'd let you know that another of the Otherworlders was sent to be with him. It's no one from your group, but in the event you want to chat with them, just keep in mind what I said about being on good behavior. Though at the same time they'd cause plenty of problems of their own when they arrive, so don't force yourself if you're not interested. I mean, hearing that actually makes me more interested. What did they do that was so bad? It's not so much what they did, but what they are. A species called Orions. She's a member of a reptilian race. So? There's plenty of those around. Heck, my local butcher's one. True, but it gets a bit more complicated when you find out that only she and one other of her group of 20 were of reptilian descent. The life gods only focused on recreating their bodies when their souls were brought over. They never considered recreating their disguises as well. As his god spoke, Ben found himself putting his head in his hands as he began to understand just what was being said. Myriad, if this is leading up to you telling me that Earth was secretly ruled by an advanced group of lizard people, I'm going to have a breakdown. Learning that the Greys were real and would project themselves across universes just to around was enough of a psychological blow. Thank you very much. Not Earth, we didn't hit the same planet twice, remember? However, the more human-like Pleiadians had a rather similar reaction to learning that they were being ruled by a hidden advanced race. Let's just say it caused some chaos. You know what? Screw it, if it's not another shocking reveal about my old world, then that's just a fun fact. I can deal with it. Either way, I won't go out of the way, but if a chance to talk comes up, then maybe I'll consider it. Thanks for the heads up. After waking and making breakfast for them, Ben and Thera went to the shop to get the cart that he and Falk had spent the previous day modifying, adding both seats and seatbelts at Ben's insistence before taking it to the guild to pick up the rest, and with that they were off. rushing down the roads as Cecily spoke in greater detail over what they'd be doing and what to expect. It was mostly along the lines of what he'd read in the handout, as well as what Uzi had told them after being grouped up. While they would all be working together, the groups were more to act as smaller teams to look out for one another amongst the crowd if need be. And what a crowd there'd be. Given the size of the herd and just what they would be facing, there'd be over 100 adventurers participating from select guilds, with the idea being that the fight would be a good way for many of them to complete their current jobs and become stronger. With the threat of war at the doorstep, even if they weren't part of a nation's army, adventurers would be expected to play their part like any other, mostly in suppressing anything that escaped the war zones and protecting civilians. They would need their strength, and this was an opportunity to get it. But with all of that said, you'll mostly be working amongst those from your own guild, so with that in mind we need to know what to expect from each other. I'm not saying you all need to bear your entire status to one another, but we're talking about how we fight. To start with, as you all know, I'm Cecily and I'm an improvised weapon user with a time augmentation. She looked at Falk next, who shook his head in annoyance at having to deal with it but played along anyway. Falk? Earth and death magic user if it's a fight. I would have thought he'd have a weapon skill, all things considered. Maybe he only said those two because they're the only parts of his status he's already revealed to me? Or maybe those are just his preferred ways of fighting. From there, the three Cyclopes bird people announced themselves as Omp, Domp, and Lomp, being club, psi, and shield users respectively, while at the same time each having access to both air and water magic. After that, each person stated their specialty until it came down to the last two. I'm Thera and I focus on earth and life magic, she said cheerfully as she drove, leaving Ben for last. I'm Ben, but you all can't really count on me for anything during this. I'm a craftsman and enchanter, but I basically have no fighting skills, so if you want your weapons maintained or enchantments added, let me know and I'll help out. Wouldn't it be better for everyone to simply seek your teacher instead since he's here? Omp asked, not in a rude way but making it clear he thought they might as well get the best option available. It was Falk who answered, happy to shut that idea down. I'm not spending time doing weapon maintenance when I'm here to fight too, and if you want enchantments then it's the boy you should be going to. His are likely to be handier than mine. Are you saying he's a better enchanter than you? Cecily asked sharply, whipping to face Falk. From a pure technical standpoint, no, he's doing well, but he has a way to go to catch up to me. His strength comes down to the pure variety of enchantments he can make. It's not something I can compete with. Falk, you handsome devil, you're going to make me blush? Ben said with a grin, feeling deeply touched to be spoken so highly of. Bah, don't be a pain. I'm not so hard-headed that I can't acknowledge your work. Well, in that case, let me know when he's better than you, Cecily said as she eyed him. I wouldn't mind a new weapon before his work gets too expensive. He woke up as he always did, around the afternoon after a long night of drinks and entertainment, opening the window of his room to breathe in the salty sea air, staring down at the large statue of his father Eneth directly under his windowsill and looking into the town. I'll have to get someone to clean it, he thought to himself. Really, every 3 days isn't enough during this season. The birds make such a mess of it as they pass through. It was with that thought in mind that he called out, alerting the waiting priests stationed outside to come in and giving the order to have it cleaned as they began silently dressing him, letting himself admire his form in the mirror as outfits were selected. How could he not admire himself? Like the others that made up his settlement, he was a Sobek, and one of the finer examples of his kind. The firm green scales of his face made his solid black eyes and sharp white teeth stand out beautifully, and they gave way to tanned flesh the lower one looked, showing off the powerful muscles that were his birthright as the son of a god. Once dressed, the priests in charge of his care respectfully parted after singing his praise, showering him with compliments for his stunning visage, something he didn't need. He knew he looked good. If anything, having to deal with the sounds of their voices was a distraction from his thoughts. The only thing he did for himself was put on a necklace, the pendant of it taking the shape of a spear and acting as a symbol of his faith, before going down for his first meal of the day. In the past he'd savor such things, the food being expertly crafted by the best chefs that could be provided. But in the last 2 years that had changed after her arrival. Sup, Ather? Still nursing a hangover? Draze said as she lounged along the side of the table the food was on, laughing as she did. When one of the summoned otherworlders had been selected for him, he'd had high hopes. But while her strength wasn't disappointing, her personality left much to be desired. Only lesser people have to deal with such things, he said as he sat down and began to eat, sampling a variety of dishes while trying to ignore her. Yeah, whatever. Then if you're fine, think you'll actually practice with me a bit today? She asked before switching to a more seductive look. Maybe we could move our bodies even more after. How many times must I say, unless there's something worth fighting, then why even bother? Practice is for those without talent. There are far more enjoyable ways to spend time. One of which she'd already hinted at. He wasn't short on lovers, but as annoying as the personality attached to it was, he couldn't deny an interest in the otherworlder on a physical level. Though her blue scales completely covered her body unlike his own, her facial features were similar enough to those his kind possessed that he didn't find himself off-put as he might for some species, and the fact that she was one of only 2 of her kind on the world made the overall experience more interesting. Perhaps after I finish I'll do just that, he thought as he ran his eyes over her while filling his stomach, at least until the apostle of his divine father and his mortal father in the world, Felth, came in and spoke up. Of course, it's up to your own discretion, but about half the adventurers have arrived in town by now. It might be advisable to start looking for a new teammate among them now rather than try to go through them all at once as the crowd grows. He hated it when the man or any others tried to dictate what he did, but he couldn't deny the point he made. As one of the 3 demigods currently living in the world, he knew he would be central in the coming war, meaning he needed allies to use. As it stood now, he only had Draze and Felth, the latter of which didn't have a single awakened skill to his name to rely on. Of course, as the son of the god Aneth, he technically had all believers of his father to use as he saw fit, but none met his standards. His race only numbered in the tens of thousands on the world, and as sad as it was to say, except for him, Felth was likely the strongest of his kind. That made the current situation a blessing. He didn't doubt for a minute that with his strength he'd be able to handle the situation alone if need be, but with all of the rank for adventurers coming, there was bound to be a few that might satisfy his search. As disappointing as it was that none of them would have the sort of awakened skills he was born to, as long as they were close then they could have their uses. Unlike him, they'd have to actually practice to show their value, but they'd be compensated enough to make it worth their while. Very well. I suppose there's no harm in spending some of the day on that. At least, I'll go after I finish eating. Despite his desire to walk alone, the other 2 ended up following him, with various priests running to each group of adventurers ahead of time to tell of his arrival, giving them the chance to show the best they had. So many towns had come to give their aid, and one by one as he went through them all he found them lacking. Nobody caught his eye. Their skills and abilities were mediocre at best, and he couldn't help but find the entire outing to be a waste of time. He could have spent the last few hours relaxing, or at worst going out to hunt to pass the day. Instead he was stuck wandering the streets, waiting for something to happen. It was only as he had given up and started heading home that something managed to catch his attention. "What's up?" Draze asked as he cocked his head to the side, but he ignored her, instead making confident, purposeful strides in the direction his mana sense was screaming at him. He didn't know what it was, but he'd picked up on a level of mana unlike any from the weaklings he'd wasted his time on already. Since he was out, he would at least go to see if it was worth his while. "We're here," Cecily yelled cheerfully as they finally got to the town. The guild master had taken the seat beside her after the first day, having switched with Ben, and her eyes were glowing from the trip, something Thera could easily understand. It seemed they could both marvel at the speed they got there and enjoyed the journey, something that couldn't be said of the rest of the group as they laid down in the back, nursing their stomachs. "Aye, that's nice and all, but give us some time. Not everyone is built for traveling like this," her uncle croaked out as he and Ben leaned against one another. "If I'd known things would be like this, I'd have made a few health potions before coming out. I don't suppose any of our wonderful life or light mages could help out a bit?" Ben asked, prompting Thera to begin a spell as Sakhel and Zeit struggled to get themselves together enough to treat each other before moving on to the rest. For the life of her, She couldn't understand what was causing the rest of them so much issues with traveling. But soon enough everyone was in good enough shape to move, so Cecily began leading them all through town, explaining things as they went. Now, we're not going to confine you to one place while we wait for something to happen. Enjoy the sights if you want. But when a call goes up, you're all to rush to the town's guild and find me. I'll lead us to our designated area from there. Meals will be provided there each day as well, but if you want something better, you're on your own. Lastly, there's an area just outside of town where adventurers can set up tents to camp out. Same as with the meals, tents will be provided, but if you want something better, you have to get it and pay for it yourself. Any questions? She waited for a moment, getting nothing but silence before she continued. Alright, in that case I recommend you use today to get familiar with the area in case anything happens, and tomorrow meet up with your groups. Since we were lucky enough to get here so early, take some time to practice together. If you need anything, you'll be able to find me at the guild, but otherwise, just make sure you don't do anything that would reflect badly on the Stonewall branch. With that, everyone split up, Falk telling them he was going to rent a place for the three of them rather than being stuck in tents, and that they should meet him at the guild in the evening, while Uzi's group spoke to them about where to meet the next day to do as Cecily suggested. After they went their separate ways, that just left Thera alone with Ben. Well, what should we do until we meet up with my uncle later? Do you even need to ask? He told her with a grin. I can't believe this stupid town only has 2 smiths and an enchanter's shop. He complained while she patted his back to console him. How do they manage? I get this place isn't as big as Stonewall, but still, they probably get a lot of stuff through traveling merchants and trade between neighboring towns. No use complaining about it, so come on. Let's get something to eat. Then there's something I want to see. This time it was her that dragged him along, only stopping at any food stall that caught Ben's eye as they went so he could sample the local flavors to the same extreme he always did before they got to where she wanted to go, and felt her breath be taken away as she stopped in her tracks. Whoa, what's the matter? Nothing's the matter. I just haven't seen anything like this before is all, she told him, captivated by the sight of the beach and ocean in front of her. A stretch of golden sand going into an endless expanse of deep blue water. She hadn't seen much of the world, but what was in front of her at that moment took her breath away. Despite the reason they'd been brought there were still people out enjoying it, some swimming in the water, others playing on the beach itself, and she couldn't help but think how fun it looked. With her need to stay cloaked, she couldn't partake herself, but the desire was there. I wish I could do that too, she sighed, accidentally giving voice to her thoughts and catching Ben's attention all the more. You want to go swimming? I mean, maybe one day, but I can't exactly do it dressed like this, can I? She said as she stretched out her arm, showing off her outfit. True, it's already getting a little beaten from our weekends out. Getting soaked probably wouldn't be the best. Besides, swimming calls for swimwear and... He trailed off as he looked at her, and she couldn't help but feel a small change that had been coming from his expression from time to time show up on his face before he blindsided her as he seemed to think aloud. Maybe I should have an indoor pool built in Stonewall. I have the money, so why not? Ben, you're being insane. Besides, I can't swim, she awkwardly admitted to him and rushed to explain herself before he said anything. I mean, it's not like I could go to any local rivers to learn while growing up because of my magic, so of course I can't. But either way, no wasting a bunch of money making a pool. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, plenty of people can't swim. Honestly, just hanging out in the water is nice, but you're right, maybe having a pool made is a bit much. Yeah, besides, you're making progress on my brace, right? Maybe when it gets to a point that I won't need it anymore, we could go somewhere. And you could teach me how? She asked, feeling more and more shy as the question left her mouth and grateful her hood was keeping her face from being seen. Even if she knew he could guess her expression as he always seemed to. Absolutely, 100%, let's do it. His sheer enthusiasm helped break the awkward atmosphere she was feeling, and she couldn't help but laugh as they found a place to sit and eat while enjoying the scenery and letting the time pass. The town itself was lovely and the people seemed friendly enough, but as the conversation died down and they enjoyed a comfortable silence, she broke it as something only she could see drifted by. A spirit, one of the water affinity, was leisurely flying by, and she couldn't help but call out to it, letting Ben know what she was doing before she did. Ever since she'd gained the spirit-empowering skill and figured out how to use it, she'd try to practice it whenever she could, namely whenever she happened to come across one. While it wasn't important enough to her to bother trying to train it all the time, especially since that would mean convincing a spirit to stay in town, she did want to make use of it when she could. "Excuse me, could I bother you for a bit?" she called out, trying to wave it down as it took a moment to realize she was talking to it. Since the majority of people couldn't see spirits like she could, often they weren't used to being approached by anything that wasn't mana-based like them, all the more so if they didn't immediately realize who she was. "Apologies, Earthkin," it began, conversing through mana in a way she could understand, but not replicate. "Did not recognize. What may I do for you?" She hesitated for a second. The spirit seemed tired, which was odd because they didn't need to sleep. Normally water spirits were more energetic. She was surprised it hadn't immediately rushed into talking about ocean currents or something along those lines, and it made her pause, but since she'd already stopped it, she would at least ask. "Sorry, but I was hoping you could help me practice a skill if you have the time. I would just need you to fire a spell or two for me if you could." "Ah, apologies again, but I have recently reproduced. Currently cannot spare mana." "Oh no, nothing to be sorry for. I'm sorry for asking you something so unreasonable out of the blue like that. Unlike great spirits, a normal spirit's mana quantity was around 10,000 and their regeneration rates were more akin to a standard mage's. While they had other demerits they had to go through when reproducing, an act that was rare among them due to the after effects. It took a group of spirits of the same affinity to safely be able to birth new ones, and as a side effect their mana regeneration rates were greatly reduced until they'd managed to reach their maximum capacity again, leaving them feeling weakened and vulnerable in the meantime. It was a large factor in why the spirit population had never recovered to what it had been on their homeworld before the invasion. It simply wasn't worth the risk. Actually, have I ever even met any spirits that had done that before? I feel like it's something Dad's only ever told me about. Oh well, perhaps wait. Wait a moment, she called out as she watched it begin to float away after giving her apology. "If that's the case, then I might be able to help out using my skill. Can you please give me a chance?" "That is acceptable. What do you need?" Just fly into my hand. I'll try and give you some mana." It did as she asked, landing in her outstretched hand as she activated her skill, letting mana flow out of her and into the intangible creature before her in a torrent. From what she'd learned while practicing, it seemed that for every one mana that transferred over, for would be lost if it wasn't going to a spirit she had the same affinity as, but she was sure that it was something that would improve as its level increased. And given that if it worked the spirit would only need about 5,000 to make up for what it had lost while creating a new one, that meant she would only need about half a day to recover so long as it worked. And work it did. She saw its form brighten before her as it took in most of her mana, and after a few minutes that left her a little tired she leaned against Ben beside her, looking at the far more energetic water spirit as it buzzed around. A smile broke out across her face despite the exhaustion. Combining that with all of the mana she would have spent the last 4 days getting them all there, it was doubtful that she'd ever managed to use so much at once in her entire life, but it had been worth it since it got her a level up. It would only be a couple days until she was in top form again, but with the amount of mana she had access to it wasn't something that would affect the emergency quest, so she didn't let it bother her, only making a mental note to not go too hard while practicing with the others the next day. "Incredible, my mana is full. Thank you, Earthkin." The spirit called out to her with cheer as she gave it a small wave. "Don't worry about it. Oh, but if you see Uncle Salanoth, give him my regards." Promising to do so, it flew off, leaving them to their own devices as she explained everything that happened to Ben, feeling the smallest bit of amusement that for once he was dealing with only hearing half of a conversation instead of the other way around before they decided to go to the guild to find her uncle. With the town's guild in sight, they were ready to meet up with her uncle and rest for the day. Even if she hadn't experienced the same sort of motion sickness as many of the others did, traveling still took its toll and she was ready for some rest in whatever place her uncle found for them. But it seemed the day wouldn't be ending yet as she heard the sound of feet slapping the ground behind them and a voice call out. "You there? Stop for a minute?" called out a young Sobuk, maybe a little older than herself. As an older one and a member of a race she couldn't identify trailed behind. As she turned to look, he reached out a hand to her, making her almost jump back on instinct, only stopping thanks to Ben putting himself in front of her. An annoyed look crossed the stranger's face as he dismissed Ben with a wave of his hand. "I don't have any business with you, so be on your way. It's the hooded one I want to talk to. Gods, what am I about to have to deal with?" She couldn't help but think to herself, while at the same time noticing Ben gently tilt his head to the side. The same he did any time his god was speaking to him. Taking it as a warning in and of itself, as well as remembering the guild master's request not to do anything to make Stonewall look bad, she opted for a more polite approach than she really wanted to. "If you have something to say, then I'll listen, but my friend won't be leaving for it. Was there a reason you called out to me?" He cast Ben a dismissive look before focusing his attention in on her. "Fine. I was able to feel the strength of the mana you exude from afar. I am the demigod Aether, son of Aneth, and I've come to tell you that you're worthy of fighting by my side." The confidence on his face was a sharp contrast to the groan she was trying to keep within herself. Ben had warned her that one of the world's few demigods resided in the town, but she didn't think she'd actually be encountering him, and now that she was aware of it, she especially needed to watch her words. The last thing she wanted was to say or do anything that could get the guild in trouble, so she did her best to politely refuse. "Thank you for the generous offer, but I must decline," she said with a small bow. "I am already in a party with my companion, and I have other obligations that need to be fulfilled." Even if she lied about having other obligations, she hoped it would be enough to get him to drop it, but instead he just focused back on Ben and snorted dismissively. "I suggest you reconsider. Look at this man. I can barely feel any strength coming from him. Someone this weak couldn't have a drop of warrior's pride to his name. With the power you wield, it's obvious it's wasted on him. You must know as well as everyone that, with the coming war, fighting strength matters. Join me and you'll actually be able to make a difference. Once again, I'm sorry, but I have my obligations and I must decline," she said with another small bow, all the while screaming in her head. Gods above, take a hint. If she had to deal with this for her entire time here, then she might have to go so far as to ask her parents for help using the influence they could wield. But she wasn't a fan of spreading her heritage so easily. She just wanted to do the quest and get out, no more, no less. Unfortunately, Aether wasn't so agreeable, instead taking off his necklace and throwing it at Ben's feet. An act she didn't understand but seemed clear enough that it carried some cultural implications she didn't want to deal with. "Pick it up if you're any sort of warrior. Let's make it clear how much of a waste someone like you is to her," he said with cold eyes as Ben stared back with the same look he'd have when trying to understand an interesting problem he wanted to take apart. "Adulha," he quietly muttered before looking past Aether to the older Sobek behind him. "Well, first, I'm not a warrior. I'm a craftsman, so no. Second, and more importantly, we're here at the request of our guild. If you insist on keeping up with this, then I'll have no choice but to discuss abandoning the quest with our guild leader. We're under no obligation to help those who would threaten and harass us." The woman with them chuckled as the older man grabbed the demigod's arm. "Aether, any more would dishonor Aneth. Let's leave it be for the time being." He reached down and grabbed the necklace as the other man stormed off before the other two followed, letting them breathe a sigh of relief. "Guess we should go tell Cecily and Falk what happened, huh?" "Yeah. I can only imagine how fun this is going to be to deal with for the next few days. Anyway, what was Myriad saying to you?" she asked him as they began walking to the guild and seeing an awkward grin form on his face. Well, as soon as I saw the guy, a couple of my skills seemed to act up on their own. He was just begging me not to cause any problems. All things considered, I'd say I handled things pretty well. Just give it to me straight, Ben. Tell me you hate me up front. It's the only way to explain the stress you constantly put me through." "Hey, I'm completely guiltless this time," he argued. "They approached us and I'd say we handled things rather well, all things considered. As for my skills, well, it's not like I had any control over that to begin with. It's the fact that you have that skill at all that's the problem," Myriad complained. "Not to mention just how much it piqued your curiosity when it started going off." It was a point he couldn't deny. As soon as Ben had turned around when Thera was called out to and saw Aether, the unexpected had happened. He started feeling the effects of his dismantling skill as he looked at the demigod, making it clear exactly how he would go about taking him apart if he had to. While the knowledge was always there to an extent, for it to be so clear and present in his mind was undoubtedly a side effect of his sacrilege skill interacting with it, telling him the best way to inflict harm on the man, something he couldn't help but find himself curious about as soon as it happened and letting himself get drawn deeper and deeper into it as the conversation progressed. Honestly, you need to keep it under control. The last thing I need is for you to go and indulge your curiosity and get yourself killed. Not to mention how bad that would reflect on me. Relax. It's not like I was going to accept a duel from him. I'm not looking to have my spine ripped out. Actually, though, how strong would he be? He asked as the question popped into his head. Being the child of a god sounded impressive enough, but it didn't really give him any context. Myriad sighed, knowing his apostle's curiosity was his driving force for better or worse as he answered. Obviously it varies depending on factors like what the paternal god represents and the parent races, but in general a few common things can be expected. Typically they'll be born with some attributes above 1,000 in awakened skills to go with it being the biggest factor, but you can also expect higher growth rates and sharper senses, which is probably what led to him being able to detect Thera at all. Wait, back up. Attributes in that range and awakened skills would just put him in the range of my classmates. Not that that wasn't impressive enough, but that meant he might only be roughly 15 times more powerful than an average person in any given one, depending of course on how he trained himself. It was plenty impressive, and there was lots of room for him to be significantly stronger as he trained through his life, but he was expecting more than what the people he came with got. Ben, I know it's a bit of an awkward subject, but that's kind of why you were all summoned. The few gods that had done such things in the past before their worlds fell told us of the strength you all normally received and how it was comparable to the mortal children of gods, plus the fact that it was significantly easier to summon a large number of souls compared to trying to produce so many demigods. That's what we did. Hell, almost 50 gods tried to have mortal children over the past 30 years, and of them only 3 succeeded, showing just how important doing the summoning was. Seriously? Man, what force in this universe decided to screw me over so much when rolling my stats then? I mean, what you ended up with wasn't exactly random chance. I've told you before you were all summoned from magicless worlds, so your souls would suck up mana when you got here. If I had to take a guess, I'd say your extreme resistances probably impaired you. So it's my own soul's fault, gotcha, he said with a sigh before switching back to the less depressing topic. So he's pretty powerful, but nothing compared to Abris, and it sounds like Cecily is going to talk to both the head of the town as well as the other guild leaders about what happened, so hopefully things will work out. Still, surprised he didn't look weirder. He was just some guy. What? Why would he look weird? I mean, look at the gods I've seen. There's Analia who looks nothing like a succubus. There's Jagal who manages to look a bit closer to her race but is still without a doubt a tree. And then you who really doesn't need an explanation. Can you really blame me for thinking he'd look a bit stranger than just an average member of his race? I guess that would be how things would seem if you didn't know how demigods were born, Myriad said in understanding at his apostle's confusion. The way gods go about it is, well, it will probably make you a little uncomfortable if you know. Hearing that only makes me want to know more. Of course it does, Myriad muttered. Fine, it's not like it's super complicated. All we do is descend into the body of one of our main believers to, well, do the act. The older fellow you saw with Ather was Enetha's apostle and the mortal father of the demigod. Wait, so you guys... A gross man, Ben said, covering himself with his arms. No using me as a meat suit. I didn't even know gods could do that. God, I have all sorts of feelings about this. I told you you wouldn't like it. Besides, even if I wanted to do it with you, which to be very clear, I wouldn't be able to. To be able to descend upon an apostle, I'd need not just a good spiritual compatibility, but a physical one as well. Your body is simply too radically different from those of my own race. Maybe if I had enough human worshippers I could after a few decades, but as it stands trying would probably leave you dead as I struggled to figure out how to make your body breathe. I guess that's reassuring. Still though, not sure how I feel about the idea that some gods use their believers as meat suits to get their rocks off. That's obviously not the only reason gods do it, you know. Descending upon a mortal makes it easier for us to act upon the world, even if it keeps us from using a portion of our power. At the height of their strength, doing so would let a god be comparable to a third-tier skill user in this world. Admittedly, that was a compelling enough reason to put up with it. If third-tier skill users were as powerful as he had been led to believe, then having a god descend upon the world would be invaluable, at least if not for the last part, Myriad said. So if that's what they could manage at their height, then what about now? Well, it's going to vary from god to god depending on how much faith they've managed to gain or hang on to while in the world on top of who they descend on, but I'd say most would be able to show the strength of low-level second-tier skills, with some being higher and some being lower, Myriad admitted, though rushed to defend them. But that's still plenty good on its own. Depending on the homeworld, there were likely no more than 6 native gods, with many having less. Given the number present here, any that descend upon their believers to fight will be able to do a lot more, even if it means having less power overall. Without having seen any third-tier skills in action, he wasn't sure if he could believe that, but decided to leave it for the time being. Even if the skill level was lower, his god wasn't wrong about there being strength in numbers, and in the end all he really cared about was that he wasn't going to be used as a flesh suit.